The train station smelled like death and coal smoke when Evelyn Harper learned her future husband was already in the ground. 2 days dead. Shot through the chest over a card game she'd never know about. 22 years old, everything she owned in one cracked suitcase, and the Wyoming wind cutting through her dress like knives. No money for a ticket home. No home to go back to anyway. Just Red Hollow stretching out around her. Saloons, mud streets, men with guns on their hips and hunger in their eyes. She should have been terrified. She was. But what she didn't know yet was that the wrong man had died. This is a story about survival, second chances, and finding home in the last place you'd ever look. Stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. Now, let's begin. The conductor's voice had barely faded. Red Hollow, end of the line, before Evelyn felt the first stab of doubt. She stood on the wooden platform, clutching her suitcase handle so tight her knuckles had gone white. October, 1875. The air tasted like dust and distance. Around her, the frontier town sprawled in every direction like something thrown together in a hurry and left to rot. False front buildings. Hitching posts. A blacksmith's hammer ringing out somewhere she couldn't see. Men in wide-brimmed hats watching her from the shade of a saloon across the street. She'd expected someone to be waiting. Thomas Garrett, the rancher who'd written her 12 letters over 8 months, each one more earnest than the last. His handwriting had been careful, almost shy. He'd told her about his land, his cattle, the house he was building. He'd sent a photograph, serious face, dark beard, eyes that looked honest. He'd promised her a future. She scanned the platform. No one stepped forward. The other passengers dispersed quickly. A cowboy with spurs that jangled. An older woman in black who didn't look at anyone. A drummer with cases of goods he started hauling toward the mercantile. Within minutes, Evelyn stood alone except for the station master, a thin man with liver spots on his hands and tobacco stains in his beard. He was staring at her. "You waiting for someone, miss?" "Yes." Her voice came out smaller than she wanted. "Thomas Garrett. He should be—" "Garrett?" The station master's expression changed. Something like pity crossed his weathered face. "You're the bride." "The bride?" Past tense already, somehow. "I'm Evelyn Harper. Mr. Garrett and I have been corresponding. We're to be married this week." The station master took off his hat. That's when she knew. "Miss Harper?" He said her name like an apology. "Tom Garrett's dead." The world tilted, just slightly. Just enough that she had to set down her suitcase before her hands started shaking too badly to hold it. That's not possible. Happened 2 nights ago, shooting at the Rocky Point. Argument over cards, best anyone can figure. He took a bullet in the chest, died before the doc could even get there. Evelyn heard the words. She understood them individually. Together, they made no sense. 2 nights ago, she repeated. "Yes, ma'am. I was still in Omaha 2 nights ago." "Yes, ma'am. I expect you were." The train whistle blew behind her, getting ready to pull out, head back east, take someone else's broken dreams away from Red Hollow. She turned and watched it start to move. Black smoke. Steel wheels. The last connection to everything she'd left behind. She should get back on. Beg the conductor. Explain. But the train picked up speed and she just stood there, watching it shrink into the distance until it was nothing but a dark spot against the endless Wyoming sky. "You got family back east?" the station master asked. Not unkindly. "No." "Friends?" No. That was the truth. Her parents had died within 6 months of each other. Her father from pneumonia, her mother from whatever it is that kills you when you've got nothing left to live for. The boarding house where Evelyn had been working in Philadelphia had closed. The city was full of desperate women and empty promises. When Thomas Garrett's advertisement had appeared in the matrimonial paper, honest rancher seeking educated wife, Wyoming territory, right box 47, she'd answered the same day. Now he was in the ground and she was standing in the middle of nowhere with $8 in her pocket and a suitcase full of things that didn't matter anymore. "There's a hotel," the station master said. "Mrs. Chen runs it. It ain't fancy, but it's clean enough. You could stay there while you figure things out." "How much?" $1 a night, 2 if you want meals." 8 nights. Maybe 12 if she skipped eating. Then what? "Is there work here?" The station master scratched his beard. "What kind of work you qualified for?" I can read, write, keep books. I taught school for a year before my mother took ill. Well, he looked uncomfortable. There's the saloons, but I don't reckon that's... No, didn't think so. He paused. Look, miss, I hate to speak plain, but this ain't the kind of town where a woman alone does well, especially not an Eastern woman with no husband and no prospects. You understand what I'm telling you? She understood perfectly. She'd heard the same thing in Philadelphia. A woman alone was a target. A pretty woman alone was prey. The next eastbound train, she said. When? 3 days. 3 days. 3 nights in $1 a night hotel with men who'd already started noticing her. She could feel their eyes from across the street, could feel the way this place was already starting to close around her like a fist. Thank you for your honesty, she said, and picked up her suitcase. The hotel was called the Frontier House, which was generous. It was 2 stories of weathered wood with a porch that sagged in the middle. But Mrs. Chen, a tiny Chinese woman with sharp eyes and exactly 0 patience for nonsense, took Evelyn's dollar and led her upstairs to a room that was, as promised, clean enough. You the bride, Mrs. Chen said. Not a question. Yes. Garrett was good man. Stupid, but good. You got bad luck. Yes. You go back east? I don't have anywhere to go back to. Mrs. Chen studied her for a long moment. Then you got very bad luck. Lock your door. Don't open for nobody. That first night, Evelyn lay on a thin mattress listening to Red Hollow through the walls. Piano music from the saloons, shouting, laughter that sounded mean. Somewhere close by, a woman's voice rising in anger, then cutting off abruptly. Evelyn stared at the ceiling and tried to figure out how she'd ended up here, tried to trace back the decisions that had led to this room, this town, this impossible situation. She couldn't cry. That surprised her. She felt like she should cry, for Thomas Garrett, for herself, for the future that had died before it started. But the tears wouldn't come. Maybe she'd used them all up on her mother. Maybe she was too scared. Maybe she was just too tired. She fell asleep counting the cracks in the ceiling and woke to October sunlight slanting through dirty windows. The second day she walked Red Hollow's main street trying to understand what kind of place this was, trying to see if there was any way she could stay. It wasn't much. 1 main street running east-west, maybe 24 buildings total. The saloons looked the most permanent. The Rocky Point, the Silver Dollar, the Lucky Strike. The Mercantile had actual glass windows. The blacksmith shop sat at the east end of town, backing onto a creek. There was a livery stable, a barber shop that doubled as a surgery, a land office, a jail that looked too small to hold anyone dangerous. And everywhere, men, cowboys coming in from the ranches, drifters passing through, miners heading up into the mountains, gamblers, cattle buyers, men who worked with their hands and men who worked with guns. They looked at her the way she'd expected, some curious, some calculating, some with an expression that made her walk faster and keep her eyes down. She stopped at the Mercantile. A bell jangled over the door. The proprietor, a heavy man with mutton chops and suspicious eyes, looked up from his newspaper. Help you? I'm looking for work. What kind? Bookkeeping, teaching, anything respectable. He looked her over. Not lewdly, just assessing. You the bride that came in on yesterday's train? Word traveled fast in a small town. Yes. Tough break. He didn't sound particularly sympathetic. But there ain't no work here for Eastern ladies. No school, no books that need keeping except my own, and I keep them myself. Are you sure there's nothing, lady? He set down his paper. Let me save you some time. There's 30 men in this town for every woman. Half those women work the saloons doing things I won't speak of in polite conversation. The other half are married to ranchers or homesteaders and work themselves half to death just staying alive. You see anywhere you fit in that picture? She didn't answer. Didn't think so. You seem like a nice girl. My advice? Get on that eastbound train and go somewhere civilized. This place will chew you up. She left the Mercantile and walked to the edge of town. The plains stretched out forever, rolling grassland, patches of sagebrush, mountains in the distance that looked blue and impossibly far away. The wind never stopped. It pushed against her like something alive, like the land itself was trying to drive her back east where she belonged. But she couldn't go back east. There was nothing there. Nothing anywhere. She was standing there trying to figure out what to do with $3 in 2 days when she heard boots on the wooden sidewalk behind her. "You're Garrett's bride." She turned. The man was tall, over 6 feet, broad through the shoulders, with the kind of build that came from actual work, not from wanting to look strong. Maybe 35, maybe 40, hard to tell with men who spent their lives outside. Dark hair going gray at the temples, a face that had seen weather and worse. Brown eyes that didn't look away when she met them. He wore work clothes. Denim pants, a canvas jacket, boots that had been repaired more than once, a hat with a wide brim, and a band that was darker where his hand always gripped it. No gun on his hip, which was unusual. Most men in Red Hollow wore iron like it was part of getting dressed. "I was supposed to be," Evelyn said. "Wade Mercer." He didn't offer his hand, which she appreciated, saved them both the awkwardness. "I run the Box M about 8 miles north. Tom Garrett was my neighbor." Evelyn Harper. "I know." He paused. "I was at the burial. Small service. Reverend Pike said some words. We planted him on a rise overlooking his land, thought you should know." Something in her chest tightened. "Thank you. He was a good man, honest, hardworking. You'd have done all right with him." "Yes." They stood there in uncomfortable silence. Evelyn waited for him to say whatever else he'd come to say, but Wade Mercer seemed content to just stand there looking out at the plains like he had all the time in the world. Finally, she broke. "Was there something else, Mr. Mercer?" "Heard you were looking for work." "I was. There isn't any." "There might be." She looked at him more carefully. He didn't look like the kind of man who played games or said things he didn't mean, but she'd learned not to trust easily. "What kind of work?" "The kind that needs doing on a ranch that's been run by a man alone for too long." He scratched his jaw, uncomfortable. "My place isn't much. House needs work. Books are a mess. I can barely read my own writing. I've got 4 hands who live in the bunkhouse and work harder than I pay them for, but none of us can cook worth a damn or keep the place from falling apart between the actual ranching." "You're offering me a job." "I'm offering you a place to stay and 3 meals a day in exchange for making the Box M livable. If you can teach the hands to read in the evenings, that'd be worth something too, maybe $50 a month on top of room and board." It was more money than she'd ever made teaching school. It was also the most dangerous thing she'd heard since arriving in Red Hollow. "Mr. Mercer, I appreciate the offer, but I can't live on a ranch with 5 unmarried men. I'd be ruined." "You're already ruined just by being here alone." That stung because it was true. "Besides," Wade continued, "the hands live in the bunkhouse. You'd have the main house. I'd move into the foreman's cabin. Door locks from the inside. You'd be as safe as anywhere in the territory, safer than here." "Why would you do that?" "Because Tom Garrett asked me to look after you if anything happened to him." She blinked. "What?" "Month ago, we were fixing fence line between our properties. He mentioned he had a bride coming, said he was nervous about it, asked me to keep an eye on his place if he wasn't around when you arrived. I told him he was being foolish, nothing was going to happen. Then something did happen." Wade's expression darkened. Jake Parsons shot him over a card game that shouldn't have mattered to anyone. Tom died because he was in the wrong place at the wrong time. Least I can do is make sure his bride doesn't end up the same way. Evelyn stared at this stranger who just offered her salvation and didn't seem to want anything in return except a clean house and balanced books. "I don't know anything about ranching." "Don't need you to. I need you to make the place livable while I keep the cattle alive through winter. That's the deal." "What if it doesn't work out?" "Then I pay you for your time and bring you back to town when the eastbound comes through. No questions, no hard feelings." The wind picked up, pulling at her skirt. Somewhere behind her, Red Hollow continued its business. Men drinking, money changing hands, the slow rot of a town built on nothing permanent. In front of her, Wade Mercer waited with the patience of someone who'd learned not to rush things. She had $3, 2 days, and no other options she could see. "All right," she said. "I'll try it." "Good." He nodded once. "Get your things. We'll leave within the hour." "That soon?" "Weather's turning, snow in the high country already. I don't like leaving the ranch for long this time of year." She went back to the frontier house, packed her suitcase, and paid Mrs. Chen for 1 night instead of 3. You go with Mercer? Mrs. Chen asked. Yes. Good. He's hard man, but honest. You be safe there. She paused. You be lonely too, but safe. Evelyn thanked her and walked back to the main street, where Wade Mercer waited with a wagon hitched to two sturdy-looking horses. He took her suitcase and set it in the back without comment, then helped her up to the bench seat. As they rolled out of Red Hollow heading north, Evelyn looked back once at the town that had almost trapped her. Then she turned forward and watched the plains open up ahead, endless and empty and terrifying. Wade Mercer didn't talk much. They rode for an hour in silence, broken only by the creak of wagon wheels and the wind. Evelyn kept stealing glances at him, trying to figure out what kind of man invited a strange woman to live on his ranch and expected nothing in return. Something on your mind? He asked finally, not looking at her. Why aren't you married, Mr. Mercer? Wade. And that's a hell of a question. You said Tom mentioned getting a bride. You must be about the same age. Why didn't you send for one yourself? He was quiet for a long time. Then, I did, 10 years ago. She made it as far as Cheyenne before she changed her mind. Can't say I blamed her. This life isn't for everyone. I'm sorry. Don't be. Worked out better this way. Marriage is hard enough without starting it with someone who already wants to leave. They rode on. The land changed gradually, the flat prairie giving way to rolling hills, the grass getting thicker, the mountains in the distance growing larger and more defined. Evelyn saw cattle scattered across the hills, hundreds of them, maybe thousands. She saw no other people. How far to the nearest neighbor? She asked. Tom's place was closest, about 3 miles south. Next after that is the Chapman spread, maybe 7 miles west. After that, you're looking at 15, 20 miles in any direction. That's very isolated. Yes. What if something happens? An accident? Or then you handle it yourself, or you die waiting for help that won't come. He glanced at her. I'm not trying to scare you. Just want you to know what you're getting into. This isn't Philadelphia. I understand. Do you? She didn't answer. How could she? She'd never been more than a mile from a city in her life. She'd never seen land this empty, never felt this kind of silence. Everything here felt bigger, the sky, the distances, the space between one human being and the next. They rode up a long rise, and at the top, Wade pulled the horses to a stop. There, he said. The Box M spread out below them. A house, small but solid-looking, built from logs and rough-cut lumber. A barn, larger than the house. Corrals. A bunkhouse. Several smaller outbuildings she couldn't identify. A creek running through it all, lined with cottonwoods that had turned yellow with autumn. It looked lonely. It looked like the edge of the world. It looked like home might look. If home was something you built with your own hands and defended with everything you had. It's not much, Wade said. It's more than I expected. They drove down the slope and pulled up in front of the house. Before Wade could help her down, 4 men emerged from the barn. The hired hands, she assumed. They looked like variations on the same theme. Weathered, wary, wearing work clothes and expressions that said they'd seen everything and weren't impressed by any of it. Boys, Wade said, climbing down from the wagon. This is Miss Harper. She'll be staying in the main house, handling the books and the cooking. You got questions? Ask them now. The oldest one, a man with gray in his beard and a scar across his cheek, stepped forward. She Tom Garrett's bride? Was supposed to be. Tough break. He looked at Evelyn, not unkindly. Name's Coleman. That's Martinez, that's Dutch, and the young one is Riley. We're not much for conversation, but we work hard and we don't cause trouble. Pleased to meet you, Evelyn said. Riley, who couldn't have been more than 19, had the decency to take off his hat. The others just nodded. Miss Harper has my protection, Wade said, and something in his tone changed. Got harder. Anyone forgets that. They answer to me. We clear? Crystal, Coleman said. Good. Get her trunk into the house. Riley, show her where the kitchen supplies are. Rest of you, back to work. We've got fence line to check before dark. The men scattered. Riley grabbed her suitcase and headed for the house, and Evelyn followed, very aware that she'd just stepped into a completely foreign world with no idea how to navigate it. The house was bigger inside than it looked. A main room with a fireplace, a kitchen area, 2 smaller rooms off to the side. It was also a disaster. Dust everywhere. Dishes piled in the kitchen, papers scattered across a table, men's clothing hanging from hooks, the smell of leather and tobacco and old coffee. Riley set her suitcase down and looked embarrassed. "It ain't usually this bad." "Yes, it is," Evelyn said. He grinned. "Yeah, okay. It is. Boss doesn't care much about keeping house. We mostly just try not to add to the mess." "Well, that's going to change." She looked around, already planning. "Where does Mr. Mercer keep his records?" "That table there. Good luck making sense of them." She walked over and looked at the papers. Riley wasn't exaggerating. Wade's handwriting was nearly illegible, his accounting system non-existent. He'd recorded cattle sales on the backs of envelopes, feed purchases on scraps of paper, wages owed on what looked like a page torn from a calendar. "How does he know what he owns?" she asked. "He doesn't, really. Just knows he's got cattle and he's got land, and somehow at the end of the year there's usually more money than when he started. That's not a business. That's luck." "Won't hear me arguing." Riley left to get back to work, and Evelyn stood in the middle of the main room, surrounded by the chaos of a man who'd been living alone too long and had forgotten, or never known, how to make a space feel like anything other than a place to sleep between work shifts. She should have been overwhelmed, should have been terrified. Instead, she felt something she hadn't felt since before her mother died: useful. She took off her traveling coat, rolled up her sleeves, and got to work. By the time the men came in for supper, the house had been transformed. The dishes were clean, the floors were swept. The papers on the table were organized into stacks that made actual sense. Evelyn had found flour, salt, dried beef, and potatoes, and had managed to turn them into something edible. Wade stopped in the doorway, staring. "You didn't have to do all this today," he said. "I had to do something. Sitting idle makes me nervous." He walked in slowly, like he was seeing his own house for the first time, ran his hand along the clean table, looked at the organized papers, smelled the food cooking on the stove. "When was the last time someone cooked in here?" Evelyn asked. "Can't remember." The hands filed in, Coleman, Martinez, Dutch, and Riley, and stood there awkwardly until Evelyn pointed at the table. "Sit. Food's ready." They sat like school children at their desks. Evelyn served stew and biscuits, and the men ate in silence, glancing at each other occasionally like they couldn't quite believe this was happening. "Miss Harper," Coleman said finally, "this is the best meal I've had in 5 years. "It's stew and biscuits." "Like I said, best meal in 5 years. Even Wade smiled at that. Just a small one, barely there, but Evelyn caught it. After dinner, the hands went back to the bunkhouse, and Wade walked her to the smaller of the 2 side rooms, the one that would be hers. "I'll move my things to the foreman's cabin tomorrow," he said. "Tonight I'll bunk with the boys. You'll be safe here." "I believe you." He paused at the door. "You did good work today, more than I expected. I haven't even started on your books yet." "Yeah, well, fair warning, they're worse than they look." "I've seen them, I know." He almost smiled again. Almost. "Get some rest. Morning comes early on a ranch." Then he was gone, and Evelyn was alone in a small room in a log house in the middle of Wyoming, surrounded by silence so complete it felt like a physical presence. She lay down on a bed that was clean now. She'd found fresh linens in a trunk, and stared at the ceiling. It didn't have cracks like the hotel ceiling. It was solid, hand-built, made to last. Outside, she could hear the wind, coyotes calling to each other in the distance, the creek running over stones. And underneath all of that, something else. The possibility that maybe, just maybe, she'd arrived exactly where she was supposed to be. Even if it had taken a dead man and $3 and the kindness of a stranger to get her here. The first week passed in a blur of work that left Evelyn too exhausted to think about anything except sleep. She woke before dawn to the sound of boots on the porch and men's voices as the hands headed out to check cattle. By the time she got the kitchen fire going and coffee made, Wade was already gone, saddled up and riding fence line or moving stock or doing whatever it was ranchers did when the days got shorter and winter started breathing down from the mountains. She cleaned, organized, cooked 3 meals a day for 5 men who ate like they were storing up for hibernation. And at night, after the dishes were done and the hands had gone back to the bunkhouse, she sat at the table with Wade's catastrophic records and tried to make sense of what he owned, what he owed, and whether the Box M was actually making money or just surviving on momentum and stubbornness. The numbers were worse than she'd expected. Wade owned the land free and clear, that much was good. But he owed money to the feed supplier in Cheyenne, owed wages to the hands that he'd been stretching out over months, and had sold cattle in the spring for prices that barely covered his costs. The man was working himself half to death to break even. She was 3 pages into reconstructing his accounts when Wade came in on the 5th night, later than usual. His shirt was torn at the shoulder and there was blood on his hand. "You're hurt," she said, standing up. "It's nothing. Let me see." "Miss Harper, Evelyn, and sit down before you drip blood on the floor I just cleaned." He sat. Maybe because he was too tired to argue, maybe because something in her voice didn't leave room for negotiation. She brought water and clean cloth and examined his hand, deep cut across the palm, still bleeding. "How did this happen?" "Barbed wire. One of the posts came loose, whole section snapped back. I wasn't paying attention." "You need stitches. I need to wrap it and get back out there tomorrow." "Wade," she looked at him, "this is going to get infected if you don't clean it properly. Do you have medical supplies?" "In the cabinet, but I'm not riding 8 miles to town for stitches." "I didn't say you had to." She found the supplies: needle, thread, whiskey. "I can do it." He stared at her. "You know how to sew up a hand?" "I sewed up my father's arm once when he caught it on a nail. Same principle." She poured whiskey over the needle and thread, then over the cut. Wade hissed but didn't pull away. "This is going to hurt." "Everything hurts. Get on with it." She worked quickly, her hands steady despite the fact that she was literally sewing human flesh. Wade watched her face, not his hand, his jaw tight. When she tied off the last stitch, he let out a breath he'd been holding. "Where'd you learn to stay calm like that?" he asked. "Philadelphia. When you're poor and there's no money for doctors, you learn to handle things yourself." "You weren't always poor." It wasn't a question. She wrapped his hand in clean bandage, not looking at him. "No, my father had a business, import company. When I was young, we had a nice house, nice things. Then his partner embezzled and ran, and everything fell apart. Father spent the rest of his life trying to rebuild, but the debt was too much. After he died, my mother and I had nothing." "I'm sorry." "Don't be. It taught me how to survive." She tied off the bandage. "Keep this clean. Change the dressing every day. If it starts to smell bad or the skin around it gets hot, you ride to town for a real doctor." "Yes, ma'am." She started to clean up the supplies, and Wade caught her wrist with his good hand. Gentle, but firm. "Thank you," he said. "It's nothing." "It's not nothing. Most women would have fainted at the sight of blood." "I'm not most women." "No." He let go of her wrist. "You're really not." After he left, Evelyn stood at the table with her heart beating too fast and her hand shaking slightly. Delayed reaction, she told herself. Just the stress of the needle and blood. Nothing to do with the way Wade had looked at her, or the warmth of his hand on her wrist, or the fact that she was living alone with a man she barely knew, and starting to feel things she had no business feeling. She went to bed and dreamed of barbed wire and blood and brown eyes that saw too much. The weather changed overnight. Evelyn woke to frost on the windows and wind that sounded angry. When she went outside to get water from the pump, the cold cut through her dress and shawl like they weren't even there. Riley was in the barn saddling horses. He looked up when she came in, blowing on her hands. "Boss says there's a storm coming," he said. "Big one. We're moving the cattle down from the high pasture before it hits." "How big?" "Big enough that we might lose some if we don't get them down in time." He paused. "You ever seen a Wyoming winter storm?" "No." "Well, you're about to. Boss says to make sure there's plenty of wood stacked by the house. If the snow gets bad, you might be stuck inside for days." Evelyn spent the morning hauling wood from the pile behind the barn to the porch. Her hands blistered, her back ached, but by noon she had enough firewood stacked to last a week, maybe more. She went inside and made beef stew, lots of it, enough to feed the men when they came back frozen and exhausted. They rode in just before dark, all 5 of them, covered in dust and looking grim. Wade's bandage was dirty and probably needed changing, but he didn't mention it, and neither did she. They ate without talking. Then the hands went to the bunkhouse and Wade stayed behind, staring at the fire. "Did you get the cattle down?" Evelyn asked. "Most of them. Maybe lost 20 head in the high country. Can't get to them now without risking the horses." "I'm sorry. It's ranching. You lose cattle. It's just a question of how many. He rubbed his face. Chapman lost 50 last winter. Found them frozen in a ravine when the snow melted. Dead animals everywhere, coyotes and buzzards picking them clean. That's what I'm trying to avoid. Evelyn sat down across from him. Your hand needs a fresh bandage. Later, Wade. He looked at her, too tired to argue. She brought the supplies and unwrapped the old bandage carefully. The cut looked better. No infection, stitches holding. She cleaned it again and wrapped it fresh, aware of how close they were sitting, how quiet the house was with just the two of them and the fire. You're good at this, Wade said. At what? Taking care of things. People. This whole place ran better in 5 days with you here than it did in 5 years before. That's not true. It is, though. You think I don't notice? The house is clean. The food's decent. My records make sense for the first time since I started keeping them. The hands are happier. Hell, even I'm... He stopped. You're what? Nothing. Forget it. But she'd seen something in his expression. Something he'd almost said and caught himself. She tied off the bandage and started gathering the supplies, trying to ignore the way her pulse had kicked up. Evelyn? She stopped. I know this isn't what you signed up for, he said. Coming out here, living like this. You were supposed to marry Tom, have a real home, build a proper life. Instead, you're stuck on a failing ranch with a man you don't know, working yourself to exhaustion for $50 a month. If you want to leave when the spring thaw comes, I'll understand. No hard feelings. She turned and looked at him, really looked. Saw the exhaustion in his face, the weight he carried, the loneliness that had carved itself into the lines around his eyes. Saw a man who'd been alone so long, he'd forgotten what it felt like to have someone care, whether he lived or died. I'm not leaving, she said. You say that now. I mean it. I have nowhere else to go, Wade. But even if I did, I think I'd stay. This place needs someone who gives a damn, and you need someone who knows how to keep books without giving themselves a headache. So unless you're planning to fire me, I'm staying. Something shifted in his expression. Relief, maybe, or hope. Hard to tell in the firelight. All right then, he said quietly. All right. The storm hit 2 days later. Evelyn had never seen anything like it. The wind came first, howling down from the mountains with a sound like freight trains. Then the snow, thick, heavy, blinding. Within an hour, she couldn't see the barn from the house. Within 2 hours, the world had disappeared into white chaos. Wade and the hands brought the horses into the barn and secured everything that could blow away. Then they came inside, 5 men tracking snow and cold, and Evelyn fed them hot coffee and stew while the storm tried to tear the roof off. How long will this last? She asked. Day, maybe 2, Coleman said. Sometimes longer. And we just wait? Not much else to do. Can't work in this? Can't even check the stock without getting lost and freezing to death. They played cards. Martinez taught her a game called Monte that she lost consistently but enjoyed anyway. Riley told stories about growing up in Texas that were probably half lies but entertaining regardless. Dutch whittled, shaping a piece of wood into something that might have been a horse or might have been a dog. Hard to tell. Wade sat by the window watching the storm, his expression unreadable. By nightfall, the temperature had dropped so low that frost formed on the inside of the windows. The hands went to the bunkhouse through snow that was already waist deep, and Wade banked the fire for the night. You going to the foreman's cabin? Evelyn asked. He looked at the door, at the snow piling against it, at the darkness outside. Cabin's 50 yards from here. I'd be frozen before I made it halfway. So you're staying here? I'll sleep by the fire. You keep the bedroom. Wade, that's not negotiable. Get some sleep. She went to the bedroom but couldn't sleep. The wind was too loud, the cold too intense. She could hear Wade moving around in the main room, feeding the fire, trying to stay warm. Around midnight, she gave up, wrapped herself in a blanket, and went back out. He was sitting with his back to the fireplace, arms wrapped around his knees. He looked up when she came in. Can't sleep? He asked. Too cold. Too loud. She sat down next to him. Is it always like this? Some winters are worse, some are better. This one feels mean. They sat in silence, watching the fire. The storm hammered at the house like it wanted in. Evelyn pulled her blanket tighter. Tell me about the woman who went to Cheyenne, she said. Wade looked at her. Why? Because we're stuck in a snowstorm with nothing else to do, and I want to know. He was quiet for a long time. Then, her name was Catherine. We corresponded for 6 months. I sent her money for the train. She made it to Cheyenne, took one look at me, and got back on the eastbound the same day. She didn't even give you a chance? Can you blame her? I was 30 years old, already looked 40. Rough, uneducated, living in the middle of nowhere. She was a city girl, same as you. Took one look at this life and knew it wasn't for her. I'm still here. You didn't have a choice. I have a choice now. The eastbound runs every 3 days. I could have left any time. He looked at her then, really looked, and she saw something in his eyes she couldn't quite name, something that made her breath catch. Why didn't you? He asked quietly. Because this is the first place I felt useful since my mother died. Because those men out there in the bunkhouse treat me with respect. Because you treat me like I have a brain and not just a pretty face. She paused. And because I think you need someone here who sees you as more than just the boss. Evelyn, I'm not saying it's smart. I'm not even saying it makes sense. But it's true. The fire crackled. The storm raged. And in the small warm space they'd created, something unspoken settled between them. An understanding maybe, or a possibility. Get some sleep, Wade said finally. Tomorrow, we dig out. But he didn't move, and neither did she. They sat there until the fire burned low and exhaustion finally pulled them under, two people who'd been alone too long learning what it felt like to have someone else nearby. The storm lasted 3 days. When it finally cleared, the world was buried under 4 feet of snow, and the temperature had dropped so low that spit froze before it hit the ground. Wade and the hands spent a week digging out the barn, the corrals, pathways between buildings. They found 2 horses dead in the south pasture, frozen, standing up. They found cattle scattered and half-starved, struggling through drifts trying to find grass that wasn't there. Evelyn kept the house running, cooked, managed supplies, rationed firewood. And at night, when everyone else was asleep, she worked on Wade's books by lamplight, trying to figure out how to make the numbers add up to survival. What she found wasn't good. 2 weeks after the storm, she sat Wade down and showed him the truth. You're broke, she said. I know that. No, you don't. You think you're struggling. You're not. You're drowning. She spread the papers across the table. You owe $200 to the feed supplier. You owe your hands 3 months of back wages. You sold cattle last spring for $8 a head when you should have gotten 12. And this winter, between the storm losses and the feed costs, you're going to lose money even if nothing else goes wrong. Wade stared at the numbers. How bad? If you can't sell cattle for better prices next spring, you'll have to let the hands go. If you can't get better prices the spring after that, you'll lose the ranch. That's not possible. It's math, Wade. The numbers don't lie. He stood up, paced to the window, stared out at the snow-covered land he'd spent 15 years building. I've never lost money, not in a single year. You've never kept proper books. You've been losing money for years. You just didn't know it. So what do I do? Evelyn had been thinking about this for days, turning it over, looking for angles, trying to find a solution that didn't end with Wade broken and the ranch sold to pay debts. You need to sell directly to the eastern markets, she said. Cut out the middlemen. The cattle buyers who come through here in spring are paying you half what the meat is worth in Chicago or New York. If you can get your cattle to the railhead and ship them east yourself, you'll triple your profit. And how do I do that? I don't have contracts in the east. I do. He turned and looked at her. My father's business was import-export, she said. I know people, not many, but some. I can write letters, make introductions. If we can get a contract with even one meat distributor in New York, it could save this place. Wade sat back down. You'd do that? It's why you hired me, isn't it? To keep the books and make this place work? I hired you because Tom asked me to look after you. Well, now I'm looking after you, so stop being stubborn and let me help. He almost smiled. Almost. You're bossy when you want to be. Someone has to be. You're too busy working yourself to death to see the obvious solutions. Fine, write your letters. But Evelyn, he caught her eyes. If this doesn't work, I need you to promise me something. What? Promise me you'll take your wages and get out before this place goes under. Don't go down with the ship just because you feel loyal. Wade, promise me. She didn't want to. But she saw the fear in his face, saw how much it cost him to ask, and nodded. I promise. She spent the next week writing letters to her father's old business contacts, to merchants she'd met in Philadelphia, to anyone who might know someone who needed beef and was willing to pay fair prices for it. She wrote carefully, professionally, making the Box M sound larger and more established than it actually was, making Wade sound like a successful rancher instead of a man one bad season away from ruin. Most of the letters would go nowhere, she knew that, but she only needed one response, one contract, one chance. She mailed them from Red Hollow on a supply run with Riley, paying for postage with her own money because Wade couldn't afford it. As they rode back to the ranch, Riley looked at her sideways. Boss seems different since you got here, he said. Different how? Less angry, less, I don't know, like he remembers there's more to life than just work. He works too hard. Always has. Ever since I started here 3 years ago. Up before dawn, out after dark, never stops. Coleman says he's been like that since the Cheyenne woman turned him down, like he's trying to prove something to himself. Evelyn thought about that, about Wade sitting alone in this house for years, building a ranch that barely broke even, working himself into exhaustion because there was nothing else to work for. He deserves better, she said quietly. Riley grinned. Yeah, he does, and I think he's starting to figure that out. Winter deepened. The snow never really melted, just got packed down and covered with new layers. The temperature stayed brutal, the cattle struggled. The hands worked in conditions that would have killed softer men. And slowly, something changed in the house. Wade started coming in earlier, started eating meals at the table instead of standing by the door ready to leave. Started asking Evelyn about her day, about the books, about what she thought they should do about the south fence line, or the sick calf, or the roof that leaked in the corner. She caught him watching her sometimes, when she was cooking, when she was reading, when she was teaching Riley to write his letters in the evenings. The young cowboy had never learned properly, and Evelyn had offered to help. One night, after Riley had gone back to the bunkhouse, Wade sat down across from her at the table. You're good with him, he said. He wants to learn. That makes it easy. He's not the only one. She looked up. What do you mean? Wade shifted uncomfortably. I never learned to read proper. Can sound out words, but it takes me forever. Numbers are fine, but anything more than basic arithmetic and I'm lost. He paused. Would you teach me? Like you're teaching Riley? Evelyn set down her pen. Of course. But Wade, you run this ranch. You manage everything. How are you doing it if you can't? I remember. I watch. I listen. I figure things out. But I can't write a letter without it taking me an hour. Can't read a contract without worrying I'm missing something. It's humiliating. It's not humiliating. Lots of people can't read. You can. I had opportunities you didn't. Still, he looked at his hands. I'd like to learn, if you've got the time. She did. And so 3 nights a week, after the hands had gone to bed and the house was quiet, Evelyn sat with Wade at the table and taught him the things he'd never learned. He was a slow reader but stubborn, working through passages in old newspapers until the words started making sense. His handwriting was terrible, but he practiced, filling pages with letters and words until they started to look like something readable. She learned things about him during those lessons. That he'd grown up on a hardscrabble farm in Missouri. That his parents had died of cholera when he was 15. That he'd worked cattle drives for 10 years before saving enough to buy this land. That he'd built this ranch from nothing, alone, because he'd never had anyone to build it with. Why here, she asked one night. Why Wyoming? Because it was empty. Because nobody cared what you'd been or where you came from. You could be anyone out here, build anything. He paused. I thought if I worked hard enough, proved myself enough, I'd deserve something good. A wife, a family, something that made all this mean something. You deserve those things, Wade. Do I? Yes. He looked at her then, and she saw something in his eyes that made her pulse kick up, something that said he was thinking about her in ways that went beyond teacher and student, beyond employer and employee. Evelyn? The door banged open. Coleman stood there, snow-covered and breathing hard. Boss, we got trouble. Chapman's cattle broke through the north fence. 100 head at least, all mixed up with ours. He's saying we cut the wire deliberately. Wade was on his feet immediately. That's horseshit and he knows it. He's riding over here now with his boys. They're armed. Evelyn stood up. Armed? Why would they be armed for a fence dispute? Wade and Coleman looked at each other. Because this isn't really about cattle, Wade said quietly. It's about water rights. It's about Chapman wanting my land, and it's about him thinking he can take it. He headed for the door, and Evelyn grabbed his arm. Don't go out there alone. I'm not alone. I've got Coleman and the boys. 4 ranch hands against however many men Chapman brought. Wade, that's suicide. What do you want me to do? Hide in my own house while he steals my cattle? I want you to be smart. Chapman's looking for an excuse to shoot you. Don't give him one. Wade looked at her, and something in his expression softened. I'll be careful. Promise me. I promise. He went out into the night with Coleman, and Evelyn stood at the window watching lanterns move in the darkness, hearing men's voices raised in anger. She couldn't make out the words, but she could hear the tension, could feel the violence coiled and ready to spring. Martinez came to the house, gun in his hands. Miss, you should stay inside, lock the door. If shooting starts, I'm getting my rifle. He blinked. You can shoot? My father taught me. I'm not very good, but I hit what I aim at if it's close enough. He almost smiled. Boss know you got a rifle? Boss doesn't know everything. They waited. The voices outside got louder, angrier. Evelyn's hands shook as she loaded the rifle, an old Winchester she'd found in the closet and cleaned in secret. She'd never shot at a person before. Didn't want to. But if Chapman's men came through that door looking for trouble, she'd do what needed doing. Then the voices stopped. The lanterns started moving away. And finally, Wade came back inside, his face grim but whole. What happened? Evelyn asked. Chapman backed down. For now. But he made it clear this isn't over. He wants my water rights, wants me gone, and he's not going to stop pushing until one of us breaks. What are you going to do? Wade looked at the rifle in her hands. Didn't know you had that. I have a few surprises left. Apparently. He sat down heavily. I don't know what I'm going to do. Chapman's got more men, more money, more connections. If he decides to really push, I'm not sure I can stop him. Evelyn set down the rifle and sat across from him. Then we need to make sure you don't have to fight him alone. Your letters to the East, when do you think you'll hear back? Could be weeks, could be never. Then we wait, and we prepare. And we don't give Chapman any excuse to start something we can't finish. Wade rubbed his face. How'd you get so strong? I'm not strong. I'm terrified. Could have fooled me. She reached across the table and took his hand, the injured one, mostly healed now, but still scarred. He looked down at their joined hands like he'd forgotten what it felt like to be touched with kindness. We'll figure this out, she said. We? We. You're not alone anymore, Wade, whether you like it or not. He turned his hand over and squeezed hers, gentle but firm. And for just a moment, in a house at the edge of the world with winter pressing in and enemies circling, Evelyn felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. The response from New York arrived on a Tuesday in late February, carried by the mail rider who only made it out to the ranches once every 2 weeks if the weather cooperated. Evelyn was feeding chickens when Riley came running from the barn, waving an envelope. "Letter for you," he shouted. "From back east." Her hand shook as she took it. The return address read Thornton & Sons, Wholesale Meat Distributors, New York City. She'd written to them 3 times, never expecting a response. Michael Thornton had been her father's friend once, before the bankruptcy, before everything fell apart. She tore it open right there in the yard, chickens scattering around her feet. The letter was short, businesslike, but the words made her heart pound. Miss Harper, I was surprised and pleased to hear from you after so many years. I remember your father fondly and was sorry to learn of his passing. Regarding your inquiry about beef contracts, we are always seeking reliable suppliers in the Wyoming Territory. If your rancher can deliver 500 head of quality cattle to the Cheyenne Railhead by May 1st, we can offer $12 per head, payment on delivery. Please respond at your earliest convenience. Regards, Monsieur Thornton. $12 per head. Wade had been getting 8 from the local buyers. On 500 head, that was $2,000 difference. Enough to pay off his debts. Enough to pay the hands, enough to save the ranch. She ran to the house. Wade was inside working on a broken harness, his reading lesson materials spread across the table where he'd been practicing that morning. Wade. He looked up, saw her face, stood immediately. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. Everything's right. She handed him the letter. Read it. He took it, squinting at the words, working through them slowly. She watched his expression change as he understood what he was reading. Disbelief. Hope. Fear. $12 a head, he said finally. Yes. For 500 head. Yes. By May 1st. He looked at her. Evelyn, I don't have 500 head ready to sell. Between the winter losses and the breeding stock I need to keep, I've got maybe 300 market ready, and that's if I sell everything I can spare. Her excitement dimmed. What about Chapman's cattle? The ones that broke through the fence? Still mixed up with mine. But they're his cattle. I can't sell them. What if you bought them from him? Wade laughed, but there was no humor in it. With what money? I'm broke, remember? Chapman knows it too. That's why he's circling. He's waiting for me to fail so he can buy this place for nothing. Evelyn sat down, thinking. There had to be a way. The contract was right there, salvation spelled out in Michael Thornton's careful handwriting. They just needed cattle. 200 more head. It should have been simple. What about the other ranchers, she asked. The smaller ones. Could you buy from them? Most of them are as bad off as I am. Worse, probably. The winter killed a lot of stock. But not all of it. Some of them must have cattle they need to sell. Wade set down the letter and looked at her. Really looked. What are you thinking? I'm thinking that you're not the only one who needs this contract. Every small rancher within 50 miles is struggling. If you could pool your cattle together, combine herds, you'd have your 500 head, maybe more. And split the profit? Better than no profit at all. Better than losing everything. He was quiet for a long time, working through it. She could see him calculating, weighing risks, trying to find the flaw in her logic. It could work, he said slowly. If I could convince them to trust me, if I could organize it. But, Evelyn, that's a lot of ifs. So we make it happen. We ride to every ranch, we explain the contract, we show them the numbers. We give them hope instead of just waiting to die. We? You can't do this alone. You'll need someone who can read contracts, manage the books, coordinate between ranches. That's me. Wade stood up and walked to the window, staring out at the snow-covered land. Chapman won't like it. If I pull this off, if I save my ranch and help the others save theirs, he loses his chance to buy up all this land cheap. He'll fight it. Let him fight. We'll fight back. He turned and looked at her, and something in his expression made her breath catch. You really believe we can do this? I know we can. Why? Because the alternative is giving up, and neither one of us is very good at that. He almost smiled. Almost. Then he nodded once, decision made. All right. We start tomorrow, you and me. We'll hit the Chapman border first, then work our way south. Every ranch, every homestead. We'll see who's willing to gamble on a better future. They rode out the next morning before dawn, just the two of them on horseback with supplies for 3 days. Coleman stayed behind to manage the ranch, grumbling about fool errands and Eastern ideas, but Evelyn caught him smiling as they left. The first ranch they hit belonged to a widow named Sarah Mitchell. Her husband had died the previous spring, leaving her with 2 young boys and 100 head of cattle she couldn't manage alone. Wade had helped her with Roundup last year, asking nothing in return. Now he was asking for her trust. She listened to their proposal sitting at a kitchen table covered in flour. She'd been making bread when they arrived. Her boys played outside, their laughter drifting through the thin walls. $12 a head, she said when Wade finished explaining. You're sure? I've got the contract right here. Evelyn showed her the letter. Thornton's is legitimate. They're one of the biggest distributors in New York. Sarah read it slowly, lips moving. And you'd handle the drive to Cheyenne? The shipping? Everything, Wade said. You just need to have your cattle ready by mid-April. We'll combine herds and move them all together. What's your cut? Same as yours, equal shares based on head count. Sarah looked at him. That's fair to the point of stupid, Wade. Maybe, but if this works, we all survive. If it doesn't, we all fail together. I'd rather have partners than employees. She thought about it. looking at her boys through the window, calculating the same desperate math that kept Evelyn awake at night. Finally, she nodded. I'm in. 60 head, give or take. When do you need them? April 15th. We'll send word before then. They shook on it. As Wade and Evelyn rode away, Sarah stood on her porch watching them go, hope written across her face for the first time in months. The next ranch was harder. Old Jim Hendricks didn't trust anyone, especially not schemes that sounded too good to be true. He sat on his porch with a shotgun across his knees and let Wade talk for 20 minutes before spitting tobacco juice and shaking his head. You're selling dreams, Mercer. I've been in this territory 30 years. Ain't nobody paying $12 a head for range cattle. I've got a contract that says otherwise. Contracts are paper. Paper burns. I'll sell to the buyers who come through in spring, same as always. $8 is $8. Better than $12 that might not exist. Wade tried arguing. Evelyn showed him the numbers, explained how the eastern markets worked. Hendricks wasn't interested. You're wasting your time, he said finally. Now get off my land. They left. Wade was silent for the first mile, jaw tight with frustration. We don't need him, Evelyn said. We need every head we can get. We'll get them from people who actually want to survive. Hendricks would rather die stubborn than live helped. That's his choice. Wade looked at her. You're getting hard. I'm getting practical. There's a difference. Over the next 3 days, they visited 8 more ranches. 5 agreed to join the pool. 2 declined politely. One, a bitter man named Sykes, who'd been feuding with Wade over water rights for years, told them to go to hell and slammed the door in their faces. But the 5 who agreed represented almost 400 head combined with Wade's stock. They were close. So close. On the 3rd night, they camped in the foothills between ranches, too far from anywhere to make it back before dark. Wade built a fire while Evelyn unpacked the supplies they'd brought. The temperature was dropping fast, the way it always did in Wyoming when the sun went down. We're still short 100 head, Wade said, staring into the flames. Even if everyone delivers what they promised, we're short. What about Thomas Garrett's ranch? Wade looked up. What about it? Is it still abandoned? Does it still have cattle on it? Some, maybe 50, 60 head running wild. But that land's tied up in probate. Nobody can touch it until the courts figure out who inherits. How long does that usually take? Out here? Could be years. Evelyn thought about that. About Thomas Garrett, the man she'd never met, lying in the ground on a rise overlooking land that wasn't producing anything except wild cattle and broken promises. What if we rounded up those cattle, she asked, used them to fill out the herd? That's technically stealing. From who? A dead man? The territory? From whoever eventually inherits the property. And what if that person is me? Wade stared at her. What are you talking about? Thomas asked me to marry him. I accepted. We had an agreement in writing. His letters prove it. Doesn't that give me some claim to his estate? You never married him. Because he died before I arrived. That's not my fault. The agreement was legitimate. Wade was quiet, working through it. Even if that's true, proving it could take months. We don't have months. Then we take the cattle now and sort out the legalities later. Worst case, whoever inherits can take their cut from the profits. Best case, the land is legally mine and the cattle are mine, and we just solved our shortage problem. You're talking about claim jumping. I'm talking about using resources that are otherwise going to waste. Those cattle are going to starve or get picked off by predators or die of disease. We'd be doing them a favor. Wade rubbed his face. This is a bad idea. Probably. If we get caught, we won't get caught, and if we do, we'll deal with it then. He looked at her across the fire, and she saw something in his expression she hadn't seen before. Respect, maybe. Or recognition that she wasn't the frightened Eastern woman who'd stepped off the train 4 months ago. When did you get so ruthless? He asked. When I realized that playing by the rules only works if everyone else is playing the same game. Chapman's not. Hendricks isn't. The cattle buyers who've been cheating you for years aren't, so why should we? Wade smiled then. Actually smiled. All right, we round up Garrett's cattle. But Evelyn, if this goes wrong, if we end up in front of a judge, we won't. But if we do, I'm taking the blame, not you. Wade, not negotiable. You've already given up too much for this place. I'm not letting you risk your freedom too. She wanted to argue, but she saw the determination in his face, the way his jaw was set, and knew he wouldn't budge. So she nodded. They rode back to the Box M the next day and spent a week preparing. Wade brought in the hands, explained the plan, offered them bonuses if they could round up Garrett's cattle without anyone noticing. Coleman thought it was insane. Martinez thought it was brilliant. Dutch and Riley just wanted to know when they were starting. They went out on a moonless night in early March, 6 riders moving quietly through the darkness toward the abandoned Garrett ranch. The house was dark, the corrals empty. But in the hills beyond, they found the cattle, wild-eyed and skittish from months without human contact, but healthy enough. It took 3 nights to round them up. Dangerous work in the dark, chasing half-feral cattle through rough country. Riley nearly got thrown when his horse stepped in a hole. Martinez took a kick to the leg that left him limping, but they got them. 63 head, more than they'd hoped for. They drove them back to the Box M and mixed them with Wade's herd. By the time the sun came up, there was no way to tell which cattle came from where. They were just cattle now, property of the pool, part of the plan that was either going to save them all or destroy everything. Wade stood at the corral fence, looking at the combined herd, almost 500 head now, exactly what they needed, and Evelyn stood beside him. "We did it," she said. "We did something. Whether it's the right thing remains to be seen. It's the only thing that makes it right." He looked at her. "You've changed, you know that? Since you got here. So have you. How do you figure? You smile more. You come inside before dark sometimes. You look at the future like it might actually exist." She paused. "You look at me like—" She stopped. She'd said too much. They were standing too close, alone in the early morning with the ranch sleeping around them and something unspoken hanging in the air between them. Wade reached out and touched her face. Gentle, his hand rough from work, but his touch careful. "Like what?" "Like you see me. Not just the help. Not just Tom's bride. Me. I do see you, that's the problem." "Why is it a problem?" "But because you deserve better than this. Better than a broke rancher with enemies and debts and a future that might not exist past May. You deserve—" She kissed him. Just stepped forward and kissed him, cutting off whatever else he was going to say about what she deserved. His surprise lasted maybe half a second before he kissed her back, one hand on her face and the other wrapping around her waist, pulling her closer. It wasn't gentle, wasn't careful. It was months of tension and fear and loneliness and wanting pouring out all at once. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Wade rested his forehead against hers. "That was a bad idea," he said. "Probably. People will talk. Chapman will use it against us. The whole territory will—" "I don't care." "You should." "Well, I don't." She looked at him. "I'm tired of being careful, Wade. I'm tired of pretending I don't feel what I feel just because it's complicated or improper or whatever other excuse we want to use. I care about you. I care about this place, and I'm not going anywhere." "Evelyn, are you going to tell me you don't feel the same way?" He looked at her for a long moment. Then he kissed her again, softer this time, like he was memorizing the moment. When he pulled back, his eyes were serious. "I'm in love with you," he said quietly. "Have been for weeks, maybe longer. But that doesn't change the fact that I've got nothing to offer you except hard work and uncertainty. That's more than I had when I got off the train. That's more than I ever expected to have. You could still leave, take your wages, go east, find someone who can actually give you a future. You are my future. This ranch is my future. That contract is our future. And we're going to make it work because the alternative is unacceptable." Wade smiled then, really smiled, and pulled her close. They stood there in the morning light while the cattle moved in the corral and the mountains watched from the distance, and something fundamental shifted in both their lives. Neither of them saw Coleman watching from the barn, grinning like he'd won a bet with himself. News of the cattle pool spread faster than they expected. Within 2 weeks, every rancher in the territory knew that Wade Mercer was organizing a combined drive to Cheyenne, bypassing the local buyers, going straight to the eastern markets. Reactions were mixed. Some thought it was brilliant. Sarah Mitchell told everyone who'd listened that Wade Mercer was the smartest man in Wyoming. Others thought it was suicide. The local cattle buyers,
The men who'd been paying $8 a head and reselling for 12 or more were furious at being cut out. They spread rumors that Wade's contract was fake, that Thornton and Sons didn't exist, that the whole thing was a scheme to steal cattle, and Chapman was the angriest of all.
He rode to the Box M 3 weeks after they'd rounded up Garrett's herd, bringing 6 armed men with him. Wade met him in the yard, and Evelyn watched from the house window with her rifle loaded and ready. "Heard you're planning a cattle drive," Chapman said, not bothering to dismount. "Word travels. Heard you're planning to steal my buyers. Can't steal what was never yours. Those buyers will take whoever's offering. If I've got a better deal, that's business." Chapman's horse shifted, sensing tension. "You think you're clever, don't you? Pooling cattle, organizing the small ranchers, cutting us out." "Us?" "Me and the other established operators. We've got a system here, Mercer. Works fine. You're disrupting it. Your system works fine for you, not so much for everyone else. That's how the world operates. Strong survive, weak get bought out." Chapman leaned forward in his saddle. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to cancel this little scheme. Tell your partners it fell through. Sell your cattle through the regular channels like always, and we'll forget this happened. And if I don't, then I'll make sure every buyer from here to Omaha knows you're unreliable. I'll tie up your contract in legal disputes until it expires. I'll drive your partners away by spreading rumors you can't deliver. And when you finally fail, and you will fail, I'll buy this ranch for exactly what it's worth, which is nothing." Wade stepped closer to Chapman's horse. "You threatening me on my own land? I'm explaining reality. You're a small operator trying to play big. You don't have the resources, the connections, or the experience. This ends badly for you. I'm offering you a way out." "I don't want your way out." Chapman smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Then I guess we'll see how this plays out. But Mercer? When you lose everything, when you're broken and desperate, don't come crying to me. I offered you mercy once. Won't happen again." He wheeled his horse and rode off, his men following. Wade stood in the yard until they were out of sight, then walked back to the house. Evelyn met him at the door. "He's scared," she said. "He's dangerous." Both can be true. But Wade, if he was confident he could stop us, he wouldn't have bothered threatening you. He'd have just done it. The fact that he came here trying to intimidate you means he knows we might actually pull this off. Wade sat down heavily. He's got resources we don't. Money, lawyers, connections. If he decides to really fight this, then we fight back. We document everything. We make sure our contract is airtight. We build alliances with the other ranchers so Chapman can't pick us off one by one. And if that's not enough? Evelyn sat across from him. Then we lose. But at least we lose trying. At least we go down fighting instead of just accepting that people like Chapman get to control everything. He reached across the table and took her hand. "How'd I survive this long without you?" "Barely, from what I can tell." He laughed, and some of the tension left his shoulders. But Evelyn could see the worry in his eyes, could feel the weight of what they were up against settling over both of them like a physical presence. That night, after everyone had gone to sleep, she sat at the table going over the numbers again. 503 head total, $12 each, $6,036 gross, minus transportation costs, fees, unexpected losses. Figure 5,000 net, divided among 6 ranching operations based on head count. Wade's share would be around 2,000, enough to pay his debts, pay the hands, and have something left over. Enough to survive another year. If they could deliver, if Thornton honored the contract, if Chapman didn't sabotage them, if the drive went smoothly, if the weather held, if none of the cattle died or got stolen or scattered, too many ifs. She was still calculating when Wade came in, wrapped in a blanket, and sat down beside her. "Can't sleep?" he asked. "Trying to figure out everything that could go wrong. That's a long list." "I know." She set down her pen. "Wade, what happens if Chapman's right? What happens if we can't pull this off?" He was quiet for a moment. "Then I lose the ranch. The hands lose their jobs. Sarah Mitchell and the others go back to struggling. And you—" He stopped. "What about me? You'll have lost months of your life on a dream that didn't work out. Time you could have spent building a real future somewhere else. This is my real future. Right here. Is it?" He turned to look at her. "Because I need you to be honest with me, Evelyn.
about what you want, about where you see this going. What do you mean? I mean, are you here because you care about this ranch or because you care about me? Because those are different things, and I need to know which one I'm working for. She stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the darkness. The question was fair. She'd been asking herself the same thing for weeks. When I first came here, she said slowly, I was just trying to survive. The ranch was shelter. You were employment. It was transactional, but somewhere along the way it stopped being about survival and started being about actually living, about building something that matters with someone who... She turned to face him. I love you, Wade. Not the ranch, not the security, not the future. You. The man who stitched up his own hand rather than admit he was hurt. The man who took in a stranger because a dead neighbor asked him to. The man who's trying to save an entire community even though it might destroy him. Det bucky seats, it is sometimes. Wade stood and crossed to her. I love you too. So much that it scares me. Because if this all falls apart, if I lose everything, I need to know you won't hate me for dragging you down with me. I could never hate you. You say that now. I mean it. Win or lose, we're in this together. That's what partnership means. He kissed her then, slow and deep, like he was trying to memorize her. When they pulled apart, he rested his forehead against hers. Marry me, he said. She blinked. What? Marry me. Not because it's practical or because of the ranch or because we need to make things proper. Marry me because I can't imagine my future without you in it, and I don't want to wait anymore. Wade, we should wait until after the drive, until we know if... No. I've spent 15 years waiting for my life to start, waiting until I had enough money, enough success, enough proof that I deserved something good. I'm done waiting. I want to marry you now, while we're still fighting, still hoping. I want you to be my wife, whether we succeed or fail. Evelyn looked at him, this hard man who'd learned to be soft with her, this careful man who was taking the biggest risk of his life, and felt something settle in her chest. Not fear, not doubt, just certainty. Yes, she said. Yes, I'll marry you. He picked her up and spun her around, actually laughing, and when he set her down, they were both grinning like idiots. When? She asked. Soon, before the drive. We'll keep it small, just us and the Hands and maybe Sarah Mitchell. Nothing fancy. I don't need fancy. Good, because fancy's not really an option out here. They planned it for the first Sunday in April, 2 weeks before the cattle drive. In the meantime, they worked harder than ever, organizing the final details, coordinating with the other ranchers, making sure everything was ready. Wade rode to Red Hollow and bought Evelyn a simple gold band from the mercantile, spending money he couldn't afford on something that mattered more than practicality. Coleman built a makeshift arch out of cottonwood branches. Martinez cleaned the main room until it shone. Riley picked wildflowers from the creek bed, even though it was still early in the season and most of them were just barely blooming. Dutch baked a cake that was lopsided but edible. And on a clear April morning with the mountains sharp against the sky, Wade Mercer and Evelyn Harper stood in front of a traveling minister who happened to be passing through and became husband and wife. Sarah Mitchell cried. Coleman tried not to and failed. The ceremony lasted maybe 10 minutes, simple vows exchanged without rehearsal or decoration. Wade's hand shook when he put the ring on Evelyn's finger. Evelyn's voice cracked when she said, I do. Afterward, they ate cake and drank whiskey, and the Hands told stories that got progressively less appropriate as the bottle went around. Sarah cornered Evelyn in the kitchen. You sure about this? She asked quietly. About marrying Wade? About all of it. The marriage, the drive, going up against Chapman. It's a lot of risk. I'm sure. Sarah studied her. You've changed since you got here. Got harder, tougher. Had to. I know. But don't lose yourself completely, okay? Don't become so hard that you forget why you're fighting in the first place. Evelyn thought about that. Why am I fighting? Because you found something worth keeping. Don't forget that when things get difficult. That night, in the room that was now theirs instead of just hers, Wade pulled her close, and they lay together listening to the wind and the distant sound of cattle and the quiet breathing of a ranch that was finally, maybe, becoming a home. You nervous about the drive? Evelyn asked. Terrified. Good. Me too. What happens if we fail? We try something else.
And if there is no something else? She turned to face him in the darkness. Then we fail together. But Wade, I don't think we're going to fail. I think we're going to surprise everyone, including ourselves. He kissed her forehead. I hope you're right. I'm always right. You should know that by now. He laughed quietly, and they fell asleep tangled together, two people who'd found each other by accident and chosen each other on purpose, betting everything on a future that was still just a possibility, written on paper from a distributor 3,000 miles away. The morning they were supposed to start the drive, Riley's horse threw a shoe, and Martinez woke up with a fever that had him shaking so hard he couldn't saddle up. Wade stood in the yard at dawn watching his carefully planned timeline disintegrate before the sun was fully up. We can delay a day, Coleman said. Give Martinez time to recover. Get Riley's horse reshod. We don't have a day. We've got 16 days to get 500 head to Cheyenne. That's 80 miles through rough country. We lose even one day, and we miss the shipment deadline. So what do you want to do? Wade looked at the combined herd milling in the holding pens, cattle from 6 different ranches, marked and counted, and ready to move. Sarah Mitchell was already here with her 2 oldest boys serving as extra hands. 3 other ranchers had sent their best riders. Everyone was counting on this working. We go, Wade said. Martinez stays here with Dutch to recover. The rest of us move out in an hour. Boss, that leaves us with 7 riders for 500 head. That's not enough. It'll have to be. Evelyn came out of the house carrying supplies. She'd packed food for 2 weeks, bedrolls, medical supplies, everything they might need. She'd also packed her rifle. What are you doing? Wade asked. Coming with you. Evelyn, don't. We're short 2 riders. You need help, and I can sit a horse well enough. I'm coming. You've never driven cattle before. You don't know. Then I'll learn. Wade, this is my future too. Our future. I'm not sitting here waiting while you risk everything. I'm coming with you whether you like it or not. Riley grinned. She's got you there, boss. Wade looked at his wife. His wife, still strange to think of her that way, standing there with determination written across her face and a rifle she knew how to use slung over her shoulder. He should have said no, should have insisted she stay where it was safe. But they both knew there was no safe anymore. There was only forward. Fine, he said. But you stay in the middle of the herd. No point position, no drag. And if I tell you to ride for help, you ride. No arguments. No arguments, she agreed, lying through her teeth. They both knew it. They moved out an hour later, 8 riders pushing 500 head of cattle north toward Cheyenne. The morning was clear and cold, the kind of spring weather that promised heat later but delivered frost now. The cattle moved reluctantly at first, confused by the combination of herds, unsure about leaving familiar grazing land. But gradually they settled into a rhythm, following the leaders, spreading out across the trail. Evelyn rode beside Sarah Mitchell, learning as she went. How to read the herd's mood, how to spot the troublemakers who'd try to break away, how to use her horse's body language to push cattle in the right direction without actually touching them. You're a natural, Sarah said after the first few hours. I'm terrified. That too. But you're doing it anyway. That's what matters. They made 12 miles the first day. Not great, but not terrible. They camped that night in a shallow valley with good grass and water nearby. Wade posted guards in shifts, 2 men watching the herd at all times while the others slept. Cattle could spook at anything, especially at night. A coyote. A strange sound. Even their own shadows in the moonlight. Evelyn lay in her bedroll next to Wade, staring up at stars so thick they looked like spilled salt. She could hear the cattle shifting and breathing, could smell their earthy presence mixed with campfire smoke and coffee. You did good today, Wade said quietly. I stayed on my horse and didn't get anyone killed. That's a low bar. It's higher than you think. He turned to look at her. I'm glad you came. I know I argued, but I'm glad. Even if I slow you down, you won't. You're tougher than half the men here. She smiled in the darkness. Only half? I'm being generous to their egos. They fell asleep to the sound of cattle and night birds and Coleman's off-key humming as he took his guard shift. When Evelyn woke a few hours later for her own watch, Wade had insisted she take shifts like everyone else. The stars had wheeled overhead and the fire had burned down to embers. Riley was waiting to be relieved. He looked exhausted. Anything happen? She asked. Couple cows tried to wander, brought them back. Other than that, quiet. He paused. You really think this is going to work? The drive? All of it. The contract, the money, standing up to Chapman. You really think we can pull it off? Evelyn looked at the dark shapes of 500 cattle spread across the valley. I think we don't have a choice except to try. That's not an answer. It's the only answer I have. Riley nodded and headed for his bedroll. Evelyn sat on a rock with her rifle across her knees and watched the herd breathe in the darkness. Somewhere out there was Cheyenne. Somewhere beyond that was New York. Michael Thornton, $12 a head, salvation. All they had to do was get there. The second day was harder. 2 steers broke away and it took an hour to round them up. One of Sarah's horses came up lame and they had to redistribute the work. The temperature climbed into the 80s and the cattle got sluggish, wanting to stop and graze every 100 yards. By noon, they were behind schedule. By evening, they were exhausted. Wade called a meeting after they made camp. Everyone gathered around the fire, 7 riders and 1 boss who looked like he hadn't slept in a week. We're not moving fast enough, he said bluntly. At this rate, we'll be lucky to make Cheyenne in 20 days. We need to push harder tomorrow, longer hours, fewer breaks. The cattle can't take much more pushing, Coleman said. They're already worn down. Then we rotate positions more, keep fresh riders on point, drive them harder in the cool morning, ease up during the heat. Boss, some of these animals are going to drop if we push too hard, and all of them are going to be worthless if we miss the deadline. Thornton's not going to wait. If we're not there May 1st, the contract's void, and we're back to selling to local buyers for half the price. Silence around the fire. Everyone knew he was right. Everyone also knew that pushing 500 head 80 miles in 2 weeks was barely possible, even under perfect conditions. And conditions were never perfect. We'll manage, Sarah said finally. My boys can handle longer hours, so can I. The others nodded agreement. What choice did they have? That night lying next to Wade, Evelyn could feel the tension radiating off him like heat. Talk to me, she said. Nothing to talk about. Wade? He was quiet for a long time. What if Coleman's right? What if I'm pushing too hard and we lose animals? What if we get there and half the herd is dead or dying and Thornton refuses the contract because the cattle aren't quality? What if we get there exactly on time with healthy animals and Thornton pays us exactly what he promised? That's a lot of what ifs going our way. So? The other version is a lot of what ifs going wrong. Neither one is more real until it happens. So why torture yourself with the bad version? He turned to face her. Because I've got people counting on me. Sarah, the other ranchers, the hands, you. If we fail, we fail together. And then we figure out what comes next. But Wade, we haven't failed yet. We're 3 days into a 16-day drive and everyone's still alive and the cattle are moving. That's not failure, that's progress. You always this optimistic? No, most of the time I'm terrified, but someone has to balance out your catastrophic thinking, and apparently that's my job now. He almost smiled. Lucky me. Very lucky. Now go to sleep. You've got another impossible day tomorrow. The third day, they made 15 miles. The fourth, 17. By the end of the first week, they'd fallen into a rhythm that was brutal but functional. Up before dawn, moving by first light, pushing through the heat, camping when the sun went down. Evelyn's hands blistered, then calloused. Her back ached from hours in the saddle. She learned to sleep anywhere, anytime, in any position. She also learned that she was stronger than she'd thought. On the 8th day, they hit the first real crisis. They were crossing a wide creek when one of the lead steers spooked and panicked. Within seconds, half the herd was trying to turn back, pushing against the riders, threatening to scatter in every direction. Hold them! Wade shouted, but his voice was lost in the chaos of lowing cattle and splashing water. Coleman's horse went down in the current. Evelyn saw him go under, come up sputtering, grab for his saddle as the horse struggled to find footing. Without thinking, she spurred her own horse into the creek, grabbed Coleman's reins, and pulled the horse steady while Coleman got his seat back. Thanks, he gasped. She didn't answer, just turned her horse and helped push the panicking cattle back into line. It took 20 minutes to get them settled, another hour to get them all across. By the time they made it to the far bank, everyone was soaked and furious and the sun was already past noon. We lost the whole morning, Riley said. Wade was checking the count, making sure they hadn't lost any in the chaos. Could have been worse. Everyone still here? All the animals accounted for? Yeah, but boss, then we keep moving. They pushed hard the rest of the day to make up time. By evening, they were all so exhausted they could barely dismount. Evelyn slid off her horse and her legs nearly buckled. Wade caught her. You all right? Fine, just tired. That was a brave thing you did. With Coleman. It was stupid. I could have gotten us both killed. But you didn't. You saved him. Wade's expression was serious. Thank you. He's one of ours. That's what you do. That night, Coleman pulled her aside while the others were eating. I know I gave you hell when you first showed up, he said. Thought you'd be useless. Thought the boss was crazy for bringing you. I was wrong. You've earned your place here. Evelyn felt something tight in her chest loosen. That might be the nicest thing anyone's said to me in years. Don't let it go to your head. You're still terrible at roping. She laughed and he grinned and something shifted between them. Acceptance, maybe. Or respect. Day 10. They were halfway to Cheyenne, ahead of schedule by half a day. The weather held. The cattle were tired but healthy. Everything was going as well as they could hope. That's when Chapman showed up. He rode in at sunset with a dozen men, all armed, all looking ready for trouble. Wade met him at the edge of camp, and Evelyn positioned herself where she could hear while staying out of direct sight. Hell of a drive you've got here, Chapman said, looking at the herd. 500 head, give or take. Must be worth a fortune. It's worth what the buyer pays. What do you want, Chapman? Just checking on my neighbors, making sure everything's above board. He smiled, and it looked like something carved from stone. Funny thing, though, I've been hearing rumors about cattle that might not belong to everyone driving them, about herds that got mixed up in ways that are hard to untangle. Wade's jaw tightened. All these cattle are accounted for. Every head has an owner. Is that right? Because I heard you rounded up some animals from the old Garrett place. That land's in probate, Mercer. Those cattle belong to the territory until the courts say otherwise. Taking them is theft. Those cattle would have died without care. We're not stealing, we're preventing waste. That's a nice story. Wonder if the territorial judge will see it that way. Chapman leaned forward in his saddle. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to separate out the Garrett cattle and leave them here. I'll make sure they get back to the proper authorities. Then you can continue your little drive with a clear conscience. Those cattle are already sold. They're part of the contract. Then you've got a problem. Because I'm not letting you drive stolen property to Cheyenne. Either you separate them out, or I ride into town tomorrow and file a complaint with the territorial marshal. By the time that gets sorted, you'll have missed your deadline and your contract will be void. Wade stood very still. Evelyn could see him calculating, weighing options, trying to find a way out that didn't exist. If he gave up the Garrett cattle, they'd be short and might not meet the contract minimum. If he refused, Chapman would tie them up in legal disputes that could take weeks. How about this? Evelyn said, stepping into the firelight. Both men turned to look at her. Chapman's expression shifted to something ugly. The lady speaks, he said. The lady has a solution. Those Garrett cattle, they're mine. Chapman laughed. Yours? On what basis? On the basis that Thomas Garrett and I had a legal agreement to marry. We corresponded for 8 months. I have his letters proposing marriage. I have my own letters accepting. Under territorial law, that constitutes a binding contract. When he died, his property should have passed to me as his intended. That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. Is it? Or is it exactly the kind of claim that would take a judge weeks to sort out? Weeks you'd have to spend in court fighting me instead of harassing my husband. Weeks during which we'd have already delivered our cattle and collected our payment. Chapman's smile disappeared. You're bluffing. Am I? You want to risk it? Because I've got letters, witnesses, and a very good lawyer back east who'd love to argue this case. My father may have died broke, but he had friends in the legal profession who owe me favors. You really want to start a legal battle you might not win. The silence stretched. Chapman looked at Evelyn, then at Wade, then back at Evelyn. She could see him recalculating, trying to figure out if she was serious. This isn't over, he said finally. It never is with you, but tonight it is. Now get off our camp before my husband decides your presence is threatening and acts accordingly. Wade's hand had moved to the gun on his hip without Evelyn noticing. Chapman noticed, though. He wheeled his horse and rode off with his men following, disappearing into the darkness. When they were gone, Wade turned to Evelyn. That was either brilliant or insane.
Probably both. What, was I right about the legal claim? I have no idea, but it sounded convincing. Coleman walked over. You just backed down Chapman with nothing but words and attitude. That's the most impressive thing I've seen all year. He'll be back, Evelyn said. He's not going to let this go. Maybe not, Wade said, but you bought us time. That's all we need.
They doubled the guard shifts that night, everyone expecting Chapman to return with more men or with the marshal or with some other scheme. But the night passed quietly. When dawn came and they started moving the herd, there was no sign of pursuit. Still, the encounter had rattled everyone. They pushed harder, trying to make up time, trying to get to Cheyenne before Chapman could organize opposition. The cattle suffered for it. 2 steers collapsed from exhaustion and had to be left behind. 3 more developed infections from minor injuries and slowed the entire herd. On day 13, they were still 20 miles from Cheyenne and running out of time. We can make it, Wade said, studying the map by firelight. If we push through the night tomorrow, drive straight through, we can get there by May 1st. The cattle can't handle a night drive, Coleman said. They're already worn down. They're going to have to handle it. We don't have another option. Boss, I said we don't have another option. The argument went in circles for an hour. Finally, Sarah Mitchell spoke up. He's right, she said. I hate it, but he's right. We've come too far to fail now. We drive through tomorrow night. We get these cattle to Cheyenne. And if we lose some along the way, that's the price we pay. The others reluctantly agreed. They spent day 14 making slow, steady progress, conserving the cattle's energy for the final push. As the sun set, instead of making camp, they kept moving. Through the darkness, through the cold, through exhaustion that had everyone swaying in their saddles. Evelyn had never been so tired in her life. Her eyes kept trying to close. Her hands on the reins felt numb. Twice she nearly fell asleep on her horse, and Wade's voice jerked her awake. Stay with me, he said. Just a few more hours. I'm not going anywhere. Promise? Promise. They pushed through the night, lost 3 more cattle to exhaustion, lost track of time, lost everything except forward motion and the desperate need to reach Cheyenne before the deadline expired. Dawn found them 5 miles outside the city. The cattle were stumbling, the horses were blown. The riders looked like corpses that had forgotten to die. But they'd made it. They drove the herd into the stockyards at 8 o'clock on the morning of May 1st. A man in a suit was waiting. Michael Thornton's representative, clipboard in hand, looking skeptical. You're Wade Mercer? I am. You're supposed to have 500 head, give or take. The representative walked through the herd, counting, examining. The wait felt like hours. Finally, he came back. 487 head. You're short. Wade's heart sank. They'd lost 13 somewhere along the way, to exhaustion, to injury, to the brutal push of the final night. 13 head short of the contract minimum. We lost some on the drive, he said, but the rest are quality. You can see that. Contract says 500. Contract says approximately 500. 13 head is within reasonable variance for a drive this long. The representative looked at him, looked at the exhausted riders, looked at the cattle that had been pushed to their absolute limit and somehow survived. Wait here, he said, and walked to the telegraph office. They waited. The sun climbed higher. The cattle milled restlessly. Evelyn stood next to Wade, so tired she could barely stand, watching the telegraph office door like her life depended on what came out of it. Which, in a sense, it did. The representative came back 30 minutes later. His expression hadn't changed. Mr. Thornton says the variance is acceptable. He'll take all 487 head at $12 each, payment on delivery to the rail cars. You've got until noon to load them. Wade actually staggered. Evelyn caught him, and for a moment they just stood there holding each other up while the world tilted and righted itself. We did it, she whispered. We did it. They loaded the cattle, collected payment, $5,844 in banknotes and gold, divided the shares according to head count. Wade's portion came to just over $2,000, more money than he'd ever held at one time, more money than he'd thought he'd ever see. Sarah Mitchell cried when she got her share. The other ranchers looked dazed. Coleman and the hands grinned like idiots. That night, they camped outside Cheyenne, too tired to celebrate properly, but too relieved to sleep. They sat around the fire passing a bottle and telling stories about the drive that were already becoming legend in their own minds. You think Chapman knows yet? Riley asked. Probably. Telegraph's fast. He'll know we made it. What do you think he'll do? Wade looked at Evelyn. I don't know. But I know we've got resources now. Money to pay lawyers if we need them. Money to reinforce the ranch. Money to survive whatever comes next. Plus, you married a woman who can bluff a cattle baron, Coleman added. That's worth something. Everyone laughed. Evelyn leaned against Wade's shoulder and watched the fire burn, feeling the weight of the past months settling into something that almost felt like peace. They'd done it. Against odds that should have destroyed them, they'd actually done it. The trip back to the Box M took 4 days without the cattle to slow them down. They rode in on a bright May morning to find Dutch and Martinez waiting with news. Chapman filed a legal claim, Dutch said. Says those Garrett cattle were stolen property. Wants the courts to seize your profits. Wade's jaw tightened, but Evelyn put a hand on his arm. Let him file. I've got letters proving my claim to Garrett's estate. More importantly, we've got money now. Money for lawyers. Money to fight back. She looked at Wade. This isn't over, but we're not helpless anymore. No, Wade agreed. We're not. That night, they sat on the porch of the house that finally felt like home, watching the sun set over land they'd fought to keep. Evelyn's hand rested on her stomach, on the secret she'd been carrying for 3 weeks and hadn't told anyone yet. There'd be time for that. Time for a lot of things now. What are you thinking? Wade asked. I'm thinking that 6 months ago I got off a train with nothing, and now I have everything. We're still going to have problems. Chapman's not done. The ranch needs work. Winter's coming again. I know, but Wade, we just drove 500 cattle 80 miles in 2 weeks and made more money than you've seen in 15 years. If we can do that, we can handle whatever comes next. He pulled her close. When did you get so confident? When I married a stubborn rancher who taught me that impossible just means difficult. She paused. Also, we're going to need to expand the house. Why? Because 3 people need more space than 2. It took him a moment. When understanding hit, his eyes went wide. Yes. He picked her up and spun her around, laughing, and she held on tight to this man who'd offered her shelter when she had nothing and ended up giving her everything. Behind them, the Box M spread out in the fading light. Not perfect, not easy, but theirs. Built with work and hope and the kind of stubborn determination that refused to accept failure as inevitable. It was more than enough. Chapman's lawsuit arrived 3 weeks after they returned from Cheyenne, delivered by a nervous clerk who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Wade read it on the porch while Evelyn watched from the doorway, her hand unconsciously moving to her stomach where their child was growing. He's claiming the Garrett cattle were stolen property, Wade said, setting down the papers. Wants the territorial court to seize our profits and award them to the estate, plus damages, plus legal fees. How much in total? $7,000. More than they'd made from the entire drive. More than they had, even with the profit from the sale. If Chapman won, they'd lose everything and still owe money. When's the hearing? 6 weeks. Territorial judge rides circuit through here in late June. Wade rubbed his face. We need a lawyer. I know someone, Evelyn said. From Philadelphia, James Whitmore. He worked with my father before the bankruptcy. He owes me a favor.
Evelyn, getting a lawyer out here from Philadelphia will cost money, I know, but we have money now, and more importantly, we have a legitimate claim. Let me write to him, see if he'll take the case. She wrote that afternoon, explaining the situation, offering payment they could barely afford. She sent it express, knowing every day mattered. While they waited for a response, life on the Box M continued with a tension that wouldn't break. Wade used part of their profit to pay off the feed supplier in Cheyenne, clearing that debt completely. He paid the hands their back wages plus bonuses that made Riley whoop and Coleman grin. He bought lumber to repair the barn roof and ordered supplies they'd been doing without for years. But he didn't breathe easier. None of them did. Chapman made sure of that. His men started showing up at property lines, watching. Not doing anything illegal, just watching, making their presence known, reminding everyone that this wasn't over. One afternoon, Evelyn rode out to check the north fence and found 2 of Chapman's hands sitting on their horses 50 yards away, staring at her. She stared back until they left. He's trying to intimidate us, she told Wade that night. It's working. Not on me, it's not. Wade looked at her, his wife.
carrying his child, refusing to be scared by men who wanted to see them broken. You're either the bravest person I've ever met or the most stubborn. Can it be both? With you, it usually is. The response from Philadelphia came faster than expected. James Whitmore would take the case. He'd be on the westbound train within the week. His fee was $500 plus expenses, which was highway robbery, but also their only option. Wade paid it without complaint. Whitmore arrived on a Tuesday, stepping off the train in Red Hollow, looking completely out of place. Eastern suit, polished shoes, briefcase that probably cost more than Riley made in a year. But when Evelyn met him at the station, his handshake was firm and his eyes were sharp. Miss Harper, my apologies. Mrs. Mercer now. I understand. Thank you for coming, James. I owed your father more than I could ever repay. This is the least I can do. He looked around at Red Hollow. Though I admit, when I pictured you married, I didn't imagine it would be quite so frontier. Life rarely goes the way we picture it. No, it certainly doesn't. They brought him to the ranch. He spent 3 days reviewing every document they had. Thomas Garrett's letters to Evelyn, her letters back, the correspondence about the marriage arrangement, Wade's records of the cattle roundup, everything. He interviewed Wade, Coleman, Sarah Mitchell, anyone who could testify about what had happened. On the 4th day, he sat them down at the kitchen table. Here's the situation, he said. Chapman's case is weak, but not frivolous. Under territorial law, property and probate belongs to the estate until inheritance is determined. You did technically take cattle from Garrett's land without clear legal authority. So we lose, Wade said. I didn't say that. Chapman has to prove those specific cattle were from the Garrett property. Can he? You mix them with your own herd immediately. There's no way to separate them now. They're gone, sold, slaughtered, consumed somewhere in New York. He'd need to prove exact head count, exact markings, exact everything. That's almost impossible. What about Evelyn's claim to the estate? Whitmore looked at Evelyn. That's more interesting. You have written correspondence showing a clear intent to marry. Under common law, marriage provisions recognized in some territories that could constitute a legal relationship. Wyoming's stance on this is unclear, which works in our favor. If the judge even considers it valid, Chapman's entire case collapses. And if he doesn't? Evelyn asked. Then we argue necessity and good faith. You found abandoned cattle dying from neglect. You preserved them, cared for them, and sold them at fair market value. Any proceeds beyond your costs could be held in escrow for whoever eventually inherits the Garrett estate. You weren't stealing, you were preventing waste. Wade leaned back. You think that'll work? I think we have a fighting chance, which is more than you had before I got here. The 6 weeks until the hearing crawled by like months. Evelyn's pregnancy became more obvious. She was showing now, couldn't hide it anymore. The ranch hands had figured it out and were treating her like she was made of glass, which annoyed her to no end. I'm pregnant, not dying, she snapped at Riley when he tried to take a bucket of feed from her hands. Yes, ma'am. Sorry, ma'am. Stop mamming me and let me work. But privately, she was scared. Not of the pregnancy, though that terrified her too, but of what would happen if they lost the lawsuit, if Chapman took everything, if their child was born into poverty and failure because of decisions they'd made trying to survive. She was thinking about this one evening when Sarah Mitchell rode up, alone, looking grim. We need to talk, Sarah said. They sat on the porch. Sarah looked out at the mountains for a long time before speaking. Chapman came to see me yesterday, made me an offer. Evelyn's stomach tightened. What kind of offer? He'll drop the lawsuit against Wade if I testify that the cattle pool was Wade's idea, that he pressured us smaller ranchers into it, that we were coerced. He'll pay me $1,000 and guarantee to leave my ranch alone. What did you tell him? I told him to leave my property before I shot him. Sarah looked at Evelyn. But he's going to others, the ranchers who were part of the pool. He's trying to buy testimony, turn us against Wade. Some of them might take it. Will they? I don't know. $1,000 is a lot of money to people who are struggling, and Chapman's promising security, protection. That's tempting when you're afraid. Evelyn thought about the ranchers who'd joined them. People who'd bet everything on Wade's plan. People who'd made good money from it, but who were still vulnerable, still scared, still just one bad season away from losing everything. What do we do? She asked. We remind them that Wade's the reason they're not already broke, that the pool worked,
That standing together is the only way any of us survive out here. Sarah paused. But Evelyn, some of them are going to take Chapman's offer. You need to prepare for that. That night, Wade and Evelyn lay in bed not sleeping. Outside, coyotes called to each other across the darkness. Sarah told you, Wade said. It wasn't a question. Yes, Chapman's smart. He can't beat us in court on the facts, so he's trying to turn everyone against us. Make me look like a manipulator who exploited the smaller ranchers. That's not what happened. Doesn't matter what happened. Matters what the judge believes. He was quiet for a moment. Maybe we should settle. Give Chapman something. Cut a deal before this destroys everything. No. Evelyn, no. We did nothing wrong. We saved those cattle. We helped those ranchers. We made an honest living with honest work. I'm not giving Chapman a single dollar because he's trying to bully us into submission. Even if fighting him costs us everything? Even then. Because if we give in now, he wins. And men like Chapman always win because people are too scared to stand up to them. Well, I'm not scared. Or I am, but I'm more angry than scared. And I'm done letting fear make our decisions. Wade pulled her close. You're going to be a terrible influence on our child. Good. Someone needs to teach them how to fight. The hearing was held in Red Hollow's town hall, which was barely large enough for the crowd that showed up. Seemed like half the territory wanted to watch. Wade and Evelyn sat at a table with James Whitmore. Chapman sat across from them with his own lawyer, a slick man from Cheyenne named Prescott, who looked at them like they were dirt on his boots.
Judge Morrison was older, weathered, with the kind of face that had seen everything twice and wasn't impressed by any of it. He listened to both opening statements without expression. Prescott went first, painting Wade as an opportunistic schemer who'd stolen cattle and manipulated struggling ranchers into a conspiracy. He made it sound almost believable. When he finished, half the room was looking at Wade like maybe he was exactly what Prescott said. Then Whitmore stood up. Your Honor, my client stands accused of theft, but theft requires intent to permanently deprive the rightful owner of property. Mr. Mercer had no such intent. He found cattle that had been abandoned for months, dying from neglect. He gathered them, cared for them, and sold them at fair market value. He kept meticulous records. Whitmore held up Wade's reorganized books, showing exactly what he did and why. This isn't theft. This is preservation of assets that would otherwise have been lost. The cattle belonged to the Garrett estate, Prescott interrupted. Which estate? Thomas Garrett died intestate. No will. No clear heirs. The territory hasn't even appointed an executor yet. Those cattle would have died before the probate process concluded. My client saved them. Judge Morrison looked interested. What about the marriage claim? Whitmore gestured to Evelyn. Mrs. Mercer has letters proving she had a binding agreement to marry Thomas Garrett. Under common law provisions, that creates a legal relationship. She has as much claim to the estate as anyone. She never married him, Prescott said, because he died before she could, through no fault of her own. Should she be punished for his untimely death? Should his wishes, clearly expressed in writing, be ignored just because he was murdered before she arrived? This is absurd, Prescott said. You can't claim to be someone's widow when you never married them. I'm not claiming to be his widow, Evelyn said, standing up. Everyone turned to look at her. I'm claiming that we had an agreement, that he invited me to Wyoming specifically to marry him, that I gave up everything, my home, my job, my entire life, based on his promise, and that when he died, I was left with nothing except some justifiable claim to what he'd promised me. Judge Morrison studied her. You're the bride who arrived too late. Yes, Your Honor. And you married Wade Mercer instead. Yes. Why? The question hung in the air. Evelyn could feel everyone watching her, waiting to see what she'd say. Chapman was leaning forward, looking smug, probably thinking she'd say something that would prove Prescott's case. Because he offered me shelter when I had none, she said. Because he treated me with respect when I had no reason to expect it. Because he's a good man trying to survive in a hard place. And I decided that was worth fighting for. Is that what you want to hear? That I married for practical reasons? Fine. I did. But I also married because I fell in love with him, because I chose him. Because building something real with someone decent is worth more than whatever Thomas Garrett left behind. The room was dead silent. Judge Morrison nodded slowly. Mr. Prescott, Your client wants $7,000 based on the theft of approximately 60 cattle. That's over $100 per head. Seems excessive. It's not just the value of the cattle, Your Honor. It's damages for... I read your filing. I understand what you're asking for. The judge looked at Chapman. Mr. Chapman, you've been awful interested in the Garrett property since Tom died. Why is that? Chapman stood. I'm protecting the integrity of... That's not what I asked. Why do you care about 60 head of cattle that weren't yours? Because theft is theft. If we allow... Mr. Chapman, the judge's voice got hard. I've been riding circuit in this territory for 12 years. I know who you are. I know your reputation. And I know that you've tried to buy the Garrett land 3 times through intermediaries. Now you're using this court to attack the one man who's helping keep small ranchers afloat. That strike you as justice? Prescott jumped up. Your Honor, that's... Sit down, Mr. Prescott. I'm talking to your client. Morrison looked at Chapman. You want me to punish Wade Mercer for saving cattle that would have died anyway? For organizing ranchers so they could get fair prices? For the crime of being better at business than you expected? That what you want? Chapman's jaw worked. I want what's legal. What's legal and what's right aren't always the same thing. Out here, we have to balance both. The judge looked at Whitmore. Your client kept records of the cattle he gathered? Yes, Your Honor. Complete records. And the proceeds from selling them? $2,047, which were prepared to place in escrow pending determination of the Garrett estate. Do that. Put the money in escrow. When and if the probate court determines an heir, they can claim it. Until then, it sits in a bank account doing nothing. Morrison looked at Chapman. That satisfy you? No, Your Honor. It's going to have to, because I'm not awarding you damages for cattle that my gut tells me you wanted to steal yourself once Mercer's ranch failed. The judge banged his gavel. Escrowed funds, no damages, case dismissed. We're done here. The room erupted. Chapman was on his feet shouting. Prescott was arguing. But Morrison just gathered his papers and walked out, leaving everyone else to sort through what had just happened. Wade sat frozen. Evelyn grabbed his hand. We won, she whispered. We didn't win. We just didn't lose everything. Out here, that's the same thing. Whitmore was grinning. That went better than expected. Judge Morrison has a reputation for frontier justice. He doesn't care much for land grabbers and bullies. Chapman stormed past their table, his face twisted with rage. This isn't over, Mercer. Yeah, it is, Wade said, standing up. You tried to break us legally, and it didn't work. You tried to turn the ranchers against us, and that didn't work. You're out of moves, Chapman. Time to accept it and move on. You think you've won? You haven't won anything. You're still a broke rancher barely holding on. One bad season, and you're finished. Maybe, but I'll face it standing up with my wife beside me and friends I didn't have to buy. That's more than you've got. Chapman looked like he wanted to swing. Prescott grabbed his arm and pulled him away. They left, and the crowd slowly dispersed. And finally, it was just Wade and Evelyn and Whitmore standing in the empty hall. You should celebrate, Whitmore said. We should pay you, Wade replied. 500 plus expenses, like we agreed. Keep it. Consider it my final debt to Evelyn's father. Whitmore smiled. Besides, I needed the reminder that law isn't just about money. Sometimes it's about doing what's right. This was right. He left to catch the eastbound train. Wade and Evelyn walked out into the afternoon sun, and for the first time in months, Evelyn felt like she could actually breathe. We need to put that money in escrow like the judge said, Wade told her. I know. That's $2,000 we could have used. It's also $2,000 that wasn't ours. It was Thomas Garrett's, or it should have been. She paused. Wade, I need to do something. What? I need to go to his grave. I never did. Never thanked him for the letters, for the hope, for accidentally bringing me to you. I need to pay my respects. They rode out to the Garrett property the next day. The house was still abandoned, slowly being reclaimed by wind and weather. But up on the rise where Wade and the others had buried Thomas, there was a simple marker. Evelyn stood there for a long time, looking at the name carved in wood. Thomas Garrett, born 1848, died 1875. A man she'd never met who'd changed her life completely. Thank you, she said quietly, for the letters, for the invitation, for dying at exactly the right time in exactly the right way to bring me here. I'm sorry I never knew you. I think we might have been happy together, but I'm also grateful things worked out the way they did. I hope wherever you are, you understand that." Wade stood beside her, silent. When she was ready, they walked back to the horses. As they rode away, Evelyn looked back once at the lonely grave on the hill. "What happens to this land?" she asked. "Probably sits empty until someone buys it at auction. Could be years." "We should buy it." Wade looked at her. "What?" "When it goes to auction, we should buy it. It borders our property. It's got good grazing, good water, and it's where this all started. Where I was supposed to go before everything changed. It feels right to own it. Evelyn, we just got out of a lawsuit. We don't have money for... We will. The pool worked once. It can work again. We'll organize another drive next spring. Make more connections in the East. Build something sustainable." She looked at him. "This isn't just about one good season, Wade. This is about building a real future. For us. For our child. For everyone who believed in us." He smiled. "When did you become such an optimist?" "When I married a man who taught me that giving up isn't an option." They rode home to the Box M, where Coleman and the Hands were waiting to hear what happened. When Wade told them they'd won, or at least hadn't lost, Riley actually cheered. Martinez grinned so wide his face probably hurt. Even Coleman's usual gruffness cracked into something that looked almost like pride. That night they had an impromptu celebration. Sarah Mitchell rode over with her boys. A few other ranchers from the pool showed up. Someone produced a fiddle. Someone else produced whiskey that was probably illegal but definitely effective. They ate, drank, told stories, and for one night forgot about all the struggles that were still waiting. Evelyn watched from the porch, one hand on her growing belly, watching Wade laugh with men who'd become friends, watching the community they'd built take shape. She thought about the girl who'd stepped off the train 7 months ago, terrified, alone, with nothing but a suitcase and broken dreams. That girl was gone. In her place was someone stronger, someone who'd learned that family wasn't about blood, that home wasn't about place, and that the future belonged to whoever was brave enough to fight for it. Summer turned to autumn. Evelyn's pregnancy progressed. Wade expanded the house, adding 2 rooms, one for the baby, one for all the paperwork that came with running an increasingly successful operation. The cattle pool became an annual event, with more ranchers joining each year. They established contracts with 3 eastern distributors, cutting out the middlemen completely. Chapman made a few more attempts to cause trouble, legal challenges, property disputes, spreading rumors. But each time, the community that Wade and Evelyn had built stood firm. The judge's ruling had given them legitimacy, their success had given them credibility, and their willingness to fight had given them respect. On a freezing January morning in 1877, Evelyn went into labor. It was early, 2 weeks before she'd expected, and the nearest doctor was in Red Hollow, 8 miles away through snow that was coming down so thick you couldn't see 20 feet. "Get Sarah Mitchell," Wade said to Riley. "Ride fast." Sarah arrived within an hour, took one look at Evelyn, and started giving orders like a general. She delivered both her own children and half a dozen others. If anyone could handle this, it was her. The labor lasted 14 hours. Wade paced outside, driving everyone crazy. Coleman finally dragged him to the barn and made him help repair a stall door just to keep him occupied. "She's going to be fine," Coleman said. "You don't know that." "No, but worrying yourself sick won't help. So hammer something and trust that Sarah knows what she's doing." Inside, Evelyn was discovering that childbirth was every bit as terrible as everyone said, and worse than she'd imagined. But Sarah's calm competence kept her grounded. When the pain got so bad she thought she'd break, Sarah's hand was there. When she was sure she couldn't do this, Sarah's voice cut through the chaos. "You can, and you will. You're strong enough. You've survived everything else. You'll survive this too." And somehow, impossibly, she did. The baby, a girl, was born just after midnight, tiny, red-faced, screaming her fury at being pulled from warmth into cold. Sarah cleaned her, wrapped her, and placed her in Evelyn's arms. "She's perfect," Sarah said. Evelyn looked down at her daughter and felt something shift in her chest. Every sacrifice, every risk, every terrifying moment had led to this, to holding this small life in her arms and knowing that whatever happened next, this was worth it. Wade came in looking like he'd aged 10 years in 14 hours. When he saw Evelyn holding the baby, His entire face transformed. "We have a daughter," Evelyn said. "Is she, are you?" "We're both fine. Come meet her." He crossed the room like he was approaching something holy, looked down at the tiny face peeking out from the blanket, reached out one rough, calloused finger and touched her hand. The baby's fingers wrapped around his, and Wade's eyes filled with tears he didn't bother hiding. "What do we name her?" he asked. Evelyn had been thinking about this for months. "Lily. I want to name her Lily." "Why?" "Because lilies grow in the harshest conditions, because they're beautiful and tough, because that's what I want her to be." Wade smiled. "Lily Mercer. I like it." They sat there together, the three of them, while outside the snow fell, and the ranch slept, and the future waited to be written. The years that followed weren't easy. Nothing about frontier life ever was. There were more harsh winters, more droughts, more struggles. But there were also triumphs. The cattle pool expanded to include 20 ranches. Wade and Evelyn bought the Garrett property when it went to auction, combining it with the Box M to create one of the largest spreads in the territory. They built a real school, hiring a teacher from the East to educate ranch children who'd never had that opportunity. Lily grew up wild and fearless, learning to ride before she could properly walk, following her father around the ranch and driving her mother crazy with her complete lack of fear. When she was 3, Evelyn gave birth to a son they named Thomas, after the man whose death had brought them all together. When she was 6, another daughter arrived, Catherine, named for Wade's first hope of marriage, the one that hadn't worked out. The house expanded again and again. What had started as a small log cabin became a sprawling ranch house that was always full of noise and life. Coleman retired but refused to leave, taking over the foreman's cabin and teaching Lily everything he knew about cattle and horses and surviving. Riley eventually saved enough to buy his own small spread. Martinez married a widow from Red Hollow and brought his stepchildren to work the ranch. Dutch kept cooking, kept grumbling, and kept the whole operation fed. Sarah Mitchell became Evelyn's closest friend and co-conspirator. Together, they organized the ranchers, established fair practices, and made sure that the old way of doing things, where men like Chapman controlled everything, didn't come back. Chapman himself had a stroke in 1880 and died bitter and alone. His ranch was sold to pay debts. No one mourned him. And through it all, Wade and Evelyn built something that neither of them could have built alone. Not just a ranch, though that's what it looked like from the outside. They built a community, a family, a place where people who'd been broken by life could come and find themselves whole again. On a warm evening in the spring of 1882, 5 years after Lily's birth, Wade and Evelyn stood on the porch watching their children play in the yard. Lily was teaching Thomas to rope a fence post. Catherine was picking wildflowers, arranging them in patterns only she understood. The sun was setting over the mountains, painting everything gold. "You ever think about that day at the train station?" Wade asked. "When you first got here?" "Sometimes. Feels like a different life, like it happened to someone else." "You were so scared." "I was terrified, but I was also desperate, and desperation makes you brave." She leaned against him. "You know what I think about most?" "What?" "How close I came to leaving, to getting back on that eastbound train and giving up. If I'd done that, none of this would exist. The children, the ranch, us. All of it hinged on me being just brave enough to stay one more day." Wade pulled her close. "I'm glad you stayed." "So am I." They stood there as the light faded and the stars emerged, watching their children play on land they'd fought to keep, surrounded by a life they'd built from nothing but determination and hope and the willingness to believe that tomorrow might be better than today. It wasn't perfect. Nothing ever was. There were still struggles ahead, economic downturns, political fights, personal losses. But they'd faced them together, the way they'd faced everything else. Because that's what you did when you found someone worth building a life with. You built, you fought, you survived. And sometimes if you were very lucky and very stubborn, you did more than survive. You thrived. Evelyn had arrived in Red Hollow 7 years ago believing she was too late for the life she'd wanted. But standing here now, she understood the truth. She hadn't been late. She'd been exactly on time. The life she'd wanted, the one she'd imagined with Thomas Garrett, would have been fine, safe, predictable. The life she'd found instead was dangerous, difficult, and completely unpredictable. It had demanded everything she had and then asked for more. It had broken her down and built her back up stronger. It had given her a partner who saw her as an equal, children who would grow up fierce and free, and a place in the world that she'd earned with blood and sweat and refusal to quit when quitting was the easier choice. That was worth more than safety, more than comfort, more than the careful, planned future she'd once dreamed of. "What are you thinking?" Wade asked. Evelyn looked at him, this man who'd offered shelter to a stranger and ended up giving her everything. "I'm thinking that I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. Even with all the struggles, all the hardship, especially with them, because they made me who I am. They made us who we are." She paused. "You know what the real lesson is? The one I want to make sure our children learn." "What's that?" "That sometimes the worst thing that happens to you is the best thing in disguise." Thomas dying seemed like a catastrophe. It felt like my life was over before it started. But if he'd lived, I would have married him, and I would have been fine. Just fine. I wouldn't have you. I wouldn't have built this place. I wouldn't have discovered how strong I actually am when I have to be. Wade smiled. "So you're saying tragedy is good?" "No. I'm saying that how you respond to tragedy matters more than the tragedy itself. I could have given up, gone back east, found some other man to marry, some other life to live. Instead, I stayed. I fought. I chose to see opportunity instead of just loss, and that made all the difference." "You make it sound easy." "It wasn't easy. It was the hardest thing I've ever done. But easy isn't the point. Worthwhile is the point. And this," she gestured at the ranch, the children, the life they'd built, "this is worthwhile." As full darkness fell, they called the children inside. Lily complained about stopping her roping practice. Thomas wanted 5 more minutes. Catherine had fallen asleep in the flowers and had to be carried. It was chaos and noise and perfect. After the children were in bed, Wade and Evelyn sat by the fire in the main room. The same room where she'd first cleaned 7 years ago. The same table where she'd organized his impossible records. But everything else had changed. The room was bigger now, filled with furniture they'd built or bought, books they'd collected, evidence of a life fully lived. "Do you have any regrets?" Evelyn asked. Wade thought about it. "A few. I regret the years I spent alone before you got here. Regret I didn't organize the ranchers sooner. Regret every cow I've lost to weather or stupidity." He paused. "But the big things? The important choices? No regrets there. Not even marrying a woman you barely knew? Especially not that. Best decision I ever made." He looked at her. "What about you? Any regrets?" "Just one." "What's that?" "I regret that I worried so much. About failing, about not being good enough, about what people thought. All that energy wasted on fear when I could have just trusted that things would work out. Would have saved you some stress. Would have saved me a lot of stress. But I suppose that's part of the lesson too. You can't learn to be brave until you've been terrified. Can't learn to be strong until you've been broken. Can't appreciate home until you've been lost." Wade stood and pulled her to her feet. "Dance with me." "There's no music." "Don't need music." They swayed together in the firelight, moving to a rhythm only they could hear. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying the smell of sage and cattle and distance. The familiar sounds of their ranch settling in for the night surrounded them. Horses in the barn, chickens roosting, the creak of wood adjusting to temperature changes. This was home. Not because it was comfortable or easy, but because they'd built it together. Because every board in this house, every fence post on this land, every head of cattle in the fields represented a choice they'd made to stay, to fight, to believe in something better. Years later, when Lily was grown with children of her own, she asked her mother about those early days, about stepping off the train into nothing and somehow ending up with everything. "Weren't you scared?" Lily asked. "Every single day," Evelyn admitted. "But your father taught me something important. Being scared doesn't mean you're weak. It means you care about the outcome. The trick is doing what needs doing anyway. What if you fail? Then you fail. But you fail trying, which is better than succeeding at nothing, because you were too afraid to attempt anything." Evelyn looked at her daughter, strong, confident, fearless in the way children of survivors often are. "The world's going to tell you all the reasons you can't do things. It'll say you're too young, too female, too poor, too uneducated, too late. Don't believe it.
I was all those things, and I still built a life worth living. Is that why you named me Lily?
Because lilies grow in hard places? That's exactly why. The ranch prospered for generations. The Mercer name became synonymous with fair dealing and hard work. The cattle pool evolved into a cooperative that helped small ranchers across 3 territories. The school Evelyn started educated hundreds of children who grew up to be doctors, lawyers, teachers, ranchers, and everything in between. And through it all, the story was told and retold, about the bride who arrived too late for one life and exactly on time for another, about the rancher who offered shelter to a stranger and found a partner instead, about 2 people who faced impossible odds and won, not through luck or circumstance, but through sheer stubborn refusal to accept defeat. It became the kind of story people told when they needed hope, when they felt like giving up, when circumstances seemed too hard and the future too uncertain. They'd remember that Evelyn Harper had faced all that and more, that Wade Mercer had been on the edge of losing everything, that together they'd built something that lasted. Because that's what love does when it's real. Not the easy, comfortable kind. The kind that demands everything and gives everything back. The kind that's forged in crisis and tempered by struggle. The kind that doesn't just survive adversity, but transforms it into strength. Wade died in 1903, peacefully in his sleep at 73. He'd lived to see his grandchildren, to watch his ranch become a legacy, to know that everything he'd worked for would outlive him. Evelyn held his hand as he went, whispering thank you for all the years, all the struggles, all the moments both beautiful and terrible that had made their life together. She lived another 12 years, dying in 1915 at 82. Her children and grandchildren surrounded her at the end, filling the house with noise and life, and proof that what she and Wade had built continued. Her last words were simple. I'm not late anymore. And she wasn't. She was exactly on time for whatever came next. The Box M still stands, over a century later. Different families have owned it, different hands have worked it, but the core remains. The house Wade built, expanded by Evelyn, still shelters people from the Wyoming wind. The land they fought to keep still produces cattle. The legacy they created still matters. Because some stories transcend their moment. Some lives echo longer than the years they lived. And some loves, the real ones, the hard-won ones, the ones built on choice rather than convenience, they never really end. They just become part of the land, the wind, the mountains. Part of the story that the frontier tells about itself, about survival and stubborn hope, and the courage to build something beautiful in a hard place, about arriving exactly when you're supposed to, even when it feels too late. Especially then,